Ik kan je niet horen. Ja, ik hoor je niet, dus... Maar hallo. And hi to the other person.
Oh, hello, Muhammad. Hello. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now I can hear you.
Oh, great.
Yeah. Who is
Yeah,
me one?
yeah. I'll tell him to come join his ass.
Who's the other person? I'm kind of baffled. Oh, it's someone else. Okay.
Yeah,
Why is me one not joining?
yeah. I'm telling him.
By the way, who is... I don't know what... Wait 1 second. Who is the person? Pliso?
Yeah. Please, so sounds ancient Greek to me.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, we'll just, wait a bit. Maybe someone else is gonna join.
Yeah.
Please, if you're like wondering,
I know me one.
just be a bit patient.
I know me one is going to join, but I don't know why it takes a bit. Maybe he's preparing his microphone.
Mm. Well, we can kind of maybe like, how are you all doing?
I'm doing fine. How are you doing?
Yeah, yeah, good. What have you been up to lately?
My life operating system, and I went
Yes.
shopping with my grandparents a few days ago. Well, shopping
Mm.
for groceries because I'm home alone for about 3 weeks because my mother is on vacation to
Yeah,
Italy because
nice,
of a wedding. I was trying to come up with an
nice.
English word. So, and yes, I have been watching some videos online and making hypothesis notes, obviously. It seems
Yeah, I
like I'm
saw
a bit
that.
more active with that than you at the moment.
Um. Yeah, the thing is, I'm like very inactive with many things I do, but that has a reason, kind of thing. Like I'm not also using my Zettelkasten. Because I'm kind of
That's
focused
heresy!
on.
That's heresy! It's blasphemy! You must always use your Zettelkasten.
Okay, you goon, foot soldier of like the Scotch Shepherd army. Yeah, okay, so yeah, I'm not really doing that, but I think like in the near future, it's gonna be it's gonna be the daily thing. Like it's gonna be hypothesis, Zettelkasten is gonna be daily thing because that's the way I engage with the world or like with website browsers, right? So if I watch videos, I did make one today actually. You can maybe check it out.
Yeah, I
It's
saw
a very
it's
light
on that
touch.
it's on that video by Nick Milo. I saw in the Discord, like in the RSS feed of the channel, the notes
Yeah,
on that. Yeah.
but normally, ideally, if you have these kinds of practices, you do them daily. The reason I'm not doing them is because I'm kind of uprooting my system, a bit like you, like the life operating system. It doesn't really mean that you need to not make annotations or whatever, but kind of reviewing my whole. Yeah, kind of like that. So there's not, but I don't mind not using it. So if you start to mind it, or if you were like, oh, I need to use my system, not using it, then it's frustration.
Yeah,
Whereas
I know.
now I kind of know what it is. Like I'm not using it, it's totally fine. I don't care. Right? Like I care zero fucks, basically, kind of thing. I'm much more focused on other systems. Let's say.
I had the
Which
same
isn't part of
idea.
the system.
I had the same idea earlier about productivity. You actually become more productive when you get in the mindset that not everything has to be done.
Yeah, the thing is, yeah, exactly. So I kind of agree with that. Yeah, that's big time. The problem is that people are too attached to the outcome of doing stuff, and because they have that mindset, they don't get things done.
Yeah.
That is a real problem. That is a real problem.
They like to feel busy, but you don't need to be busy. You actually need to get like 1 or 2 really important things done a day, and you achieve more than 99% of the population.
Yeah. Someone else joined. I think it's me one.
Yeah,
so.
it's me one who renamed himself to Source.
Yeah, and it is, I must say, kind of confusing. So you have to explain yourself, else you're not allowed to join this call, and you have to go. Sorry, man.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
We can hear you, but
okay, nice.
You're called Source right now, so.
I can explain. The reason why I changed my name.
You have to watch out, right? Like if you say if you give the wrong answer, I'm gonna kick you from this call.
I don't even know if you have the permissions for that. I mean, I do, but.
Oh. Shit.
Yeah, the reason I changed it was because I think I'm getting close. I was just working towards a theory, right, of information and stuff. So I feel like I'm getting closer to it. So that's why I named I'm getting closer to the source.
So if you have reached the source, you're gonna rename your profile character to the truth, like truth, with like capital T.
Yeah.
You have like reached,
or knowledge.
you have kind of, or knowledge, or like like divinity or something. I don't know.
Exactly.
You have reached the source, the source of life.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you look at the profile picture, also changed. So I just put like a lot of graphs and stuff. So yeah. Otherwise, you guys good?
Yeah, we're good. You had like a major life overhaul, from what I've heard.
Yeah,
so.
Exactly.
But from my not really that much.
Now you're not. You are not
the same name.
You are not me1 anymore. You are like me 3.0, the largest software update ever.
Transformed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've not changed that much. I'm like same profile picture and name, like nothing has changed.
Yeah, you and Mr. Hoorn, you have the same profile and name since I remember from iCanStudy.
Yeah, I know. I have it for over a year, maybe 2.
Static.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's good. No, welcome. I don't know how to say the name. Please, so.
Yeah.
Welcome to the book club.
Yeah, he has his microphone muted. I hope he will say something because it's cool to hear a new.
Yeah. So if you I'd recommend you to talk, but if you don't want to talk, like I'm not gonna force you. Only no one is gonna force you. You can kind of type or something in the chat if you have any questions, and I will kind of keep tabs, and Mr. Hoorn and me one probably as well. Mm-hmm. If you have anything to say, we'll just look in the chat and then get that that way. So should we start or do you want to kind of talk random topics again, or like close that off?
I'm not sure if more people are gonna join.
I think it's good right now. No, that's good. I think we should start. I don't think we should wait any longer. So,
yeah, true. Yeah. We can just start and people will jump in if they want to.
Yeah, exactly. So.
That's the benefit of doing it on Discord instead of on Zoom.
Yeah.
Yeah. So should I just start?
Yes, sure.
Yeah, you can start.
Yeah, great. So can you, by the way, see me right now?
No, because your video turned off.
Yeah, because I'm like in other applications, so then it turns off, which is kind of annoying, but it is what it is. I will go back to Discord then, because that's the case. It's good right now? Yeah, right?
You can see,
yeah. Yeah, good. Okay, so this one is actually, I'm curious, have you all read the sections of the what we were going to read today, which was basically about pigeonholing a book and X-raying a book? Just curious.
I mean, I have read it, but I haven't read it yet for this book club. I kind of forgot, but I can speed read it, and I probably know what we're talking about if someone mentions it, just based on recognition.
Okay.
Yeah, so, same here.
Yeah, same. I read it actually before the book club right now.
Yeah, I wanted to do it, but I got sidetracked.
Yeah, it happens, no problem. But I will try to give it structure then, this meeting. Because I've actually made a pretty good outline, and I would just point out to a few things that we can kind of discuss about like those sections. But I think before even doing that and jumping into the weeds, kind of I think maybe important to zoom out and kind of really, I think the first two chapters of the part 2 of like, and this is analytical reading of the book, the part of the book, and kind of zoom out and actually see how this relates to inspectional reading, because it does a lot. Like, and this is, I think we have already discussed this with Mr. Hoorn.
Yeah,
like, for example, the pigeonholing a book thing, you could say like, well, is it inspectional, yes or no?
Yeah.
And if you read this chapter, Adler says like, well, this happens ideally before you read even the book, which basically he says like it's inspectional reading. So it's actually part of inspectional reading.
I don't get why they put it in this part of the book. I just don't understand.
Okay, yeah, so what doesn't matter about that's why I'm saying like, you know, it's kind of important to, that's why it's also this book club meeting is called inspectional and analytical reading, or let the first 2 stages of analytical reading. So let, you know, before we kind of get into the deep end.
Yeah.
It's basically, you know, kind of to give like introductory kind of what these sections were about is pigeonholing a book, which is basically classifying a book. And before you read a book, it is important to know what kind of book you're even reading. Okay.
Yeah, before you read it deeply, that is like an inspectional read doesn't depend
analytical reading. Exactly, because inspectional reading, you do inspectional read to even explore and identify what the topic is, to do like the pigeonholing, basically, right? So. But then, if you want to read it more deeply, it's useful to know what kind of book it is. So that's kind of what pigeonholing is about. And then the second chapter that we're going to discuss, which is chapter 7 of the book, I think, is about X-raying a book, exactly.
I think that...
And it's... Yeah, well, did you want to comment?
Yeah, I wanted to say that I think the primary difference is that pigeonholing a book is mostly concerned with the unity, like with the whole of the book, whereas X-raying the book is more closely related to the structure and the parts of the book.
Okay, so that is actually, I'm just gonna say straight, sorry, unfortunately, but it's not true, because pigeonholing, you can just check the chapters, and that it's fine.
Then I just remember for a while.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I'm just gonna say it straight, but like,
yeah, that's excellent.
So the pigeonholing, so I'm just gonna kind of re-jog the memory of you guys. I think that's a good thing to do, is like, and then we can go into deep questions about the chapters, what is contained in them. So chapter 6 again is pigeonholing. I'm just gonna clarify your mistake here.
Yeah.
6 is about exactly classifying the book.
Yeah, you're right.
7, on the other hand, is about X-raying, which basically means creating a structure of the book, which basically contains of 2 things primarily that Adler points out: the unity of a book, and then the compartments and the organization, the parts of the book, right?
Yeah, I separated them out of those 2 chapters, but it is only in one chapter.
You forget, we forget, and then that's totally fine, by the way. But what you did point out right is that there is a difference between stating the unity and stating the parts. And this is what chapter 7 kind of touches upon.
Yeah.
But they kind of are important for both. He uses the metaphor of a house. So, and my big question when reading this I'm just going to introduce that. But I think after that, maybe if you have any comments, maybe me one as well. For me, the big question is like, well, the pigeonholing a book is straightforward. I think you do that while inspectional reading. That's also what Adler said, ideally, right?
Yeah.
But when you make a structure of the book, how do you make a structure of the book? Do you already start an analytical reading? Do you do that while inspectional reading? And I was kind of, I don't know. So I was kind of left blank on that. I don't know exactly how I should think about that. But
I mean, that's a really good question. I think definitely that, as you said, the unity / the whole of the book and the parts of the book are interrelated. I think he even states it somewhere that when you are working on identifying the unity of the book, you are automatically also getting more aware of the parts of the book, and when you're trying to find the parts of the book, you are becoming more aware of the unity of the book. So in that sense, they are interrelated, and you do not have to do them individually and have them set in stone, but as you're working on one, you can correct and adjust the other. But yeah, I think that I have this actually as a part of my inspectional reading, also the X-raying. But I'm like off the tablet, but I'm not sure.
That's what I'm saying. There's a connection here to be made, and we were talking about that previously, if I remember correctly, in inspectional reading. part of like page 51, we kind of in depth we did a pretty good analysis, I think, and he talked about different types of note making. Adler, when it comes to inspectional reading, I think when it comes to inspection, I'm not sure though, but maybe it's also applicable to analytical reading, which would be very confusing if it's only in the inspectional. But he makes a distinction between the note making structural. You remember this?
Yeah, structural, inspectional, conceptual, analytical, and then he talked about dialectical notes, which are for syntopical reading.
Yeah, but that is, in my opinion, it's such an important part because it also applies again to what we're reading right now.
By the way, Hegel joined. Hello, Hegel.
Refer back. Hegel, hi.
Yeah, he's muted, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm interested. Like, why are you called Hegel?
Well, he's specifically called I'm not Hegel, but we all call him Hegel.
No, I think he's called Hegel, right? So, yeah. I don't know. Yeah, sorry, Mima, what did you want to say?
Oh, no, I wanted to say, actually, why should we pigeonhole a book? I'm asking that because if we do the first level of reading, which is superficial reading, there's really no need to pigeonhole a book once you get to analytical, unless we're planning to skip superficial and then just go straight to analytical. You see, do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think like
if we follow the yeah.
Yeah, I was about to say, like, I think that I don't even know if Adler and Van Doren mentioned this in the book itself, but it is usually what I advise. What I would say is that superficial reading, it is a way to not mistake, to not get sidetracked by the trees and forget the forest. So to really stumble upon detail. So I would say a superficial reading is very useful if a book is far beyond your current understanding or reading level. But for simple books like, like for example, 10x is easier than 2x by Dan Sullivan and Dr. Bayman Hardy, like that sort of modern books, I would either only keep it to a superficial reading and not go into an analytical reading, or I would not do a superficial reading and go straight to analytical reading. It kind of depends on the kind of value I'm trying to get out of it. But to sum it up, the superficial reading, you can skip it if a book is not that difficult in essence, but that does not mean you need to skip inspectional reading itself, because systematic skimming, which is a part of inspectional reading, should always be done.
I think what you're missing in your answer, maybe, I'm just guessing, but like, is why we should, that was what his question was, is like, why should we even do like pigeonholing a book? Like, that was your question, right, like Miwon?
Yeah, it was, yeah.
Yeah, but he kind of he expanded on that with the inspectional reading part, and based on that, I gave my answer.
But I think...
I'd like to hear, yeah.
Yeah, so what I think... the thing is, I think it's primarily about if you were to read a book analytically. That's, I think, what also Adler says. If you were to read a book analytically, okay, you've done inspectional read, and you were to read it analytically, you should know what the book is about. You should have pigeonholed the book, and if you're not doing that, then you cannot even, in a good way, to read the book analytically. Adler says that before you read a book analytically, and analytical reading, maybe for Plinus, or like what his name was, I don't remember. It's basically, it is, yeah. So there are many ways of reading a book. By the way, you can maybe sleep whilst reading a book and have no fucking clue what the author is saying. That is like the majority of people. You can, again, going back to inspectional reading, that's much more of a skimming kind of a way, or like not really deeply reading the book, whereas inspectional analytical, is like much more deep. Again, this is like very overgeneralization, not really going into detail here, but I think when it comes to like the pigeonholing, it's like before you read a book analytically, you should really know what the book is about.
But that gives,
because if you don't know what the book is about,
that iterates Adler's point, but it does not give an answer to the question why should you do it.
Yeah, so why should you do that? Well, okay, so I'm gonna try and give answer to that. Like, why we should be doing that is that because if you want to understand the author on a more deep level, and if you don't even know if you're reading a history book and you don't even know it's a history book, that's like a very kind of broad, like, and then you want to understand the book deeply. How the fuck can you understand the book if you don't know it's a history book? Like, this is just facts, right? Like, am I stupid here? Is that, like, did that kind of land me one? I mean, that was kind of a bad answer, but I don't know.
No,
It's a good question.
Yeah, you want
I don't know. Like, honestly, I don't have... Maybe the answer is very simple, and it makes my answer, like, very unsophisticated. Maybe there's a more sophisticated answer, I don't know.
No, I understand. It's basically to get an idea of what kind of book you're about to read. That's why I was confused between the... But I think I understand, yeah. Superficial reading is... or rather, inspectional reading. I think it's just to get an idea of what the book is about in general, like the contents of the book. Versus pigeonholing, which is in analytical reading, is to kind of get acquainted with the book itself. So not necessarily the content, but kind of understand what kind of book it is and who it was written for and the style in which it was written. So that different aims in that respect, yeah.
Yeah,
but
so
I was just thinking, yeah.
Should we kind of
go ahead,
deepen out? Should we kind of deepen, maybe kind of flesh out and deepen out, like, what is actually, like, what the kind of major parts is of, like, a pigeonholing? How do we do pigeonholing, basically? And maybe that's gonna help as well to kind of clarify and give a better answer. Maybe we can kind of collectively try to give a better answer. It's like, why should you even do pigeonholing a book? Maybe we can...
Iedere keer als
why are you laughing?
Iedere keer als ik dat woord hoor, dan denk ik aan een varkenshol.
So I don't even get the joke, but okay.
Yeah, doesn't matter.
Yeah, he talked a bit of Dutch, but I didn't even... Let me read the chat. Okay, yeah, that's not about just what he said. Like, never mind, I was kind of off track. But, like, let's try to kind of get into, like, a bit of the meat. So how do we pigeonhole a book? And, well, it's like, how do you classify a book? Like, there are, like, generic classification schemas, but... And on page 64, Adler also mentions that, well, like, we can kind of categorize books, but, like, how do we categorize them? And Adler gives a few things, and those are, like, very... Again, everyone knows fiction versus non-fiction. Adler makes another one, which is called practical versus theoretical books. And within non-fiction, you could say, or expository works, as Adler calls it.
Yeah.
We can also talk about, like, is it history? He makes three major distinctions: history, philosophy, science, basically. And then you can... Again, there's, like... This categorization system is, like, very... It can be, like, very... hard to kind of... I don't know. Like, well, it's like, not some... Like, yeah? Do you want to comment?
Yeah, to say onto that, usually when I have done my inspection or reading, like, based on the template, and in my experience, more often than not, I encounter books which have a degree of both, like mostly theoretical in nature with some practical tips, or mostly practical in nature with some theory to explain why the practice works, or some books that are mostly scientific with some philosophical elements, or vice versa. You know, it's not black and white in that sense. It's usually on a spectrum.
Okay. Yeah. Sure. But how do we classify books then? Like, you know, again, it's like, why should we do that? Like, kind of what we wanted, and how do we do that? Again, we might have, like, a sense of, like, which the kind of the things where we can classify it under.
I don't know.
But even that, like, how do you? And again, I think Adler gave a few hints and clues as to how we could go about it.
Yeah, I think it would be worth going into that, maybe, but, like, I just want to say, for me, pigeonholing or classifying a book is pretty easy. When I have done my inspection or reading, it is not hard for me to say what kind of book it is. I basically just can wing it.
Yeah, okay, but, like, there is a good way to go about it, and what kind of things can we go, can we use to kind of categorize a book, basically? I don't know, because this is kind of new territory for me. I mean, I'm not really conscious of like when I'm kind of reading a book, what kind of book it is. I'm not really making that conscious, that process. For me, it's kind of a new thing. So, yeah. I don't know. Yeah, you said like Hoorn that it was but it might be for you, but not for other people. So
Yeah,
I think that
I mean, like
was
for me personally, it is self-explanatory in that sense. It's obvious and quite easy to pigeonhole, like based on the inspectional reading. I think inspectional reading is the means.
Okay, how do you do that then?
Pigeonhole.
How do you do that?
But
okay, I want to know. No?
But for me, it is not rather obvious at this moment, like the purpose of pigeonholing, because I don't see that much how it improves my understanding. But because it takes so little time, I just do it anyway. That's the thing.
Yeah. Okay. My question then is like, we can maybe go into a few things here, but like, how do you pigeonhole a book?
Yeah, by means of inspectional reading. It is just I do my inspectional reading and then I conclude what kind of book it is. So in that sense, inspectional reading is the way by which you pigeonhole.
Yeah, I would agree, and I think this is also what Adler touches upon. He says that, for example, if you kind of look at the title of a book, right? He gives the example of a book I've not read, but I'm definitely planning on reading. If you want to look along, we can go to page 62 if you want, but I'm just going to say it, and then you don't need to go to page 62, and it's totally fine. But he introduces, so yeah, I think I'm...
Yeah, the origin of
I can speak.
The other one.
No, I'm going to use the decline and fall of the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
I kind of know that out. Again, I'm pretty acquainted with the Roman history, so for me, it's kind of, and I've heard about Gibson enough times to kind of know what he's about. I've not read the book myself, so I can't go about that. But
Gibbon, not Gibson.
Gibbon?
Yeah.
Edward Gibbon.
Yeah.
Is it Edward Gibbon? Yeah, I might have. Okay,
the
whatever.
book says Gibbon, but because you just said Gibson, I said it says Gibbon here.
I think you're right. Let me actually, before making a huge mistake, Edward Gibbon. You're right, Edward Gibbon. It is. I mean, I just made whatever. It is fine, but. The title, again, when we're pigeonholing, for example, if you stumble upon this book called The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, well, that is a good start to just look at the title. Again, this is also part of inspectional reading. Like, even because many people, if they would take this book, and this book is like a fucking tome, right? Like, this is a very classical book, a very deep book. And if we were to stumble upon this book, it's a hard book, by the way. Like, it's not an easy book. So if you were to stumble upon this book, and we would just read it from page 1 without, again, doing an inspectional read, like looking at the title a bit more in depth, table of contents, index, and so on. This is all part of the inspectional reading ecosystem, basically. And again, for this book, let's just look at the title. Okay, we're just like stumble upon this book. We're like, okay, the title is The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. And so, what Adler points out very well is that, well, the title kind of reveals a bit about what the book is about. If you look at the first part of the title,
it's also, I don't even remember what Adler specifically said about it, but the thing that comes to my mind also, which is why the title would stand out to me, is that it is a bit unintuitive. It would be more intuitive for me to read something like The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire rather than The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. So, to my mind, the title is about the period leading up to the complete fall of the empire. That should be what the book is about, to my mind, just based on the title. The word decline stands out for me rather than what it would, in my mind, be more intuitive to say is rise. Do you get what I mean?
Yeah. I totally get what you mean. So, again, the decline, it's, so many people would confuse this, maybe this book was just like a history about the Roman Empire, right? But this book starts at around 200, or like 300, because it's about the first chapters at the Antonines, basically. And so the decline kind of, again, it starts with the decline, which is like, roughly 200, 300 CE, or like, I don't know how to pronounce it in English. Sorry. Christus.
So, AD is that?
AD, yeah, AD. I forgot about that. So, I'm a historian, by the way, but like I study history, so whatever. So, it starts there, so that's what decline means. It's at the peak and the pinnacle of the Roman Empire, and then it starts to kind of dip from there. and it kind of progresses until the end, of course.
I will
and yeah, what do you want to comment on?
Unless you are about to move on to another topic, I want to let you finish first because my thing is a little bit side.
Okay, so what I wanted to say is that from this title, we can already, for a historian, it's very valuable to say, like, what is this book about? Like, from what time period does this book span? That's super useful value. If you didn't look at the title closely enough, you wouldn't get from the title alone that it would span those 200, 300 years. A person just might expect it's about the Roman history, and then the Roman Republic is not even in the book. Of course not. The Roman Republic was like few centuries before that, right? So these are kind of things that allows you to pigeonhole a book. Now, if you have done that, if you have looked more closely at the title of the book, you can now know, because you know more about the book and what it is about. Again, pigeonholing the book. Now we can kind of you can read it much better, of course. So with that information, basically. Yeah, that's my point.
Yeah,
I think we can kind of skip over pigeonholing after this because I think it's self-explanatory. I don't have really other things to say about it, so then we can kind of go on. But
sure.
yeah,
I was about to give you like a way to remember it. Like BC, it literally stands for before Christ, so it's like the minus
after Christ.
years.
Yeah, I know.
And then you have and then you have AD, which is Latin. It stands for
true.
It's for Anno Domini, which stands for in the year of our Lord. So that is after the year zero.
Precies. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That is. Thanks for the tip. So then I know that, but like I kind of know that, but then it kind of escaped me.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Mimwan, do you have anything else to mention about, or Source? Do you have anything else to mention about, like pigeonholing?
Yeah. I just wanted to try it out to see what value it could bring. So let me just share my screen quickly. Let's see. So this is a new book that I downloaded, and I just wanted to try it out on this book. Let's see if I can. Yeah. Okay. So
I think Matthew, you're translating it wrong. By the way, I'm just referring to Matthew in the chat here, but like.
Yeah, I know. I know I translated wrong, but it sounds.
Okay, Nima, what are you gonna do right now that we're gonna look with?
He is going to share a book for the pigeonhole system thing.
Okay.
For the pigeonholing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I tried the pigeonholing as described in How to Read a Book. So as you can see that this is the title of the book.
There's
and I think it says also
I didn't see it. I think you went too fast actually because it's very important to actually look at the title. Like don't go too quick.
Again, and the subtitle is very important.
This is the whole point of Adler. Yeah.
Okay, I should go slowly. So
much more slowly. Again, the book of why, the new science of cause and effect. Like, you should think about that. You shouldn't go ahead and skip and say this is the title. Like, even now, I'm like trying to understand what it could mean.
Yeah.
So, the new science of cause. Again, from what I'm reading from the subtitle, the new science means that the paradigms are shifting. A paradigm shift, perhaps, or a new view of looking at cause and effect, right? So there might have been a previous. Again, I have no context. I have no clue what this book is about. But just looking from the subtitle, I'm making an assumption that the new science of cause and effect refers to a new way of looking at cause and effect, almost like a new paradigm, basically.
Yeah, and it also like the subtitle is very important because if there wasn't a subtitle and it was just called The Book of Why, I would classify this book not as cause and effect, but I would classify it as a book about the meaning of life, for example.
But the thing is, you should not stop at reading the title. You should definitely look at if you were to read the TOC, you would definitely get an idea that it's about cause and effect, or like even the introduction.
Of course, but still.
Yeah, so let's go to that. So if you get kind of good at the start, is like how many chapters can you kind of scroll because now. I don't know exactly what is there. Okay, go slowly down. Just how much is there? How many chapters? Like the total, the inventory of everything. Oh, that's everything. Okay, so we can kind of look at this. Okay, we can kind of look at this then.
Yes. It doesn't tell me much.
Have you looked at the title? we're now looking at the TOC, right? So this is inspectional reading, what we're doing together collectively, basically. Just keep in mind. Let me just look a bit, and then we can kind of.
I think the headings of the chapters are pretty nicely done. There are some books which basically don't tell you anything until you have read the book, which I absolutely hate. But this at least gives some information. It might not be the best, but it's good.
No, it's not great. I would say personally, I don't find it. For example, chapter 6, paradoxes galore, and then like, what the fuck, man? Sorry, man, but like I didn't.
No, well, I would get that it's probably about the paradoxes. The chaos that paradoxes bring, like a lot of paradoxes.
Okay.
But I agree that it could be better, but it's not the worst I have seen.
Yeah. So that's what I meant with some of the stuff that is explained in the book of how to read a book. I don't really get the aim. I mean, I always try to look at it from a kind of either I'm trying to understand or I'm trying to learn something, right?
I mean,
and by doing this, I am not really understanding the book any better or learning. I might as well just go to the first chapter. Because the first chapter
have an index?
Okay. Make your point, and then I will kind of comment.
Yeah, me too.
The preface gives me a better explanation of what's going on in this book. I'll just skip. Of course, I'll see the title because
I think you're getting it wrong. By the way, sorry, but like, you can finish your point, but like, sorry for the comment there, but like, you can kind of finish your point, and then I will kind of comment.
Yeah. So I'll just go to the preface, and then it'll give me kind of a little bit of information about the book, and maybe I'll go to the first chapter, and then at that point I know what kind of book it is and whether I want to continue reading it or not.
Yeah. Okay.
That was just my opinion.
First of all,
can I comment or like Mr. Hoorn?
Yeah, I want to first. Like the reading the preface is also a part of inspectional reading. That's first. And And second, you also have like an index. I wanted to ask if this book has an index.
And so,
you get a lot from the index, and it's a lot faster than reading through, for example, the whole first chapter.
Yeah.
Okay.
So my comments is, I think, first of all, from what I'm getting, from what you're saying, again, this might be unfounded, but like, I think you don't quite get what like a pigeonholing book is, which it's basically part of inspectional reading, and inspectional reading includes many things, like checking the title and maybe the TOC, but it also includes looking at the index, reading the introduction a bit, reading the preface a bit, reading the publisher's blurb,
sometimes
reading the conclusion a bit. Yeah, sometimes. I'm not saying these are all things you can do. Reading like kind of sifting through the book, reading a bit here and there. Not everything. Thinking that the last chapter is important because you thought so when you read the TOC. Then going to the last chapter, reading a bit there, maybe like the last few words. And these kinds of things are part of like the inspectional reading. And from this, okay, so you're interrupting. So I'm okay. You can kind of comment, but
no, you go first.
No, you wanted to say something, and then I can make my points because you already wanted to butt in, so I'm gonna give you the floor.
Yeah. I was about to say, like, when I inspectional read, I mostly, I think I get most value actually from the index nowadays, if the book has one, because from the index, based on how many references a term has, I can kind of find out what are the most important terms of the book and find therefore out the big ID, as well as the fact that you have to remember, if I remember correctly, like in the time that Mortimer Adler and Charles van Doren wrote the book How to Read a Book, most table of contents were more analytical in nature and had actually good chapter titles. So it would be more beneficial at that time to read through the table of contents than sometimes we have now in modern books. But I can be wrong in this aspect, but that is what I had in mind.
Yeah. So to finish off, exactly, I think the index is a super valuable place to visit before even reading the book. And this is all done. And again, I think what Mimon pointed out is like, well, why would you do all of this stuff? Why would you kind of sift through and systematically skim the book, and why would you read the introduction a bit and the conclusion a bit? Why would you read the title a bit? And why would you go to the index? And why would you do the TOC? Just read the book, man. Just go to the page 1 and then read the book through. But when you do that, you go like this. You have like no idea. You go like this to the book. You have no idea what the book is about. And then you don't even understand. You know, if to kind of connect it to Justin's song, is like he says, like, no, don't go in like this, right? You need to make
a backbone.
Like what was it?
Pre-studying.
Exactly. This is pre-studying. The Pigeonholing book is pre-studying. I think in the pre-studying, probably, again, I don't know Justin's song. I've not done this course in anything, so you have to kind of fill me in. But like, probably part of the pre-studying is like, well, what is this whole thing about? Like, what is identifying what it is going to be about, or something along those lines? Right? Am I right? Yes or no?
Yeah, Dr. Justin Sung's pre-study is mostly about, like, indeed, coming up with a frame of mind to think about the book rather than learning the content of the book. It's finding out the 3 to 5 main concepts that the book dives into, as well as the relationships between them.
Exactly. So this is what pigeonholing partly does. X-Raying does this more deeply. X-Raying really creates a structure. Pigeonholing identifies what it is about. It is a frame that makes learning easier or reading easier when you start to get deeply in the book. It is not something like, well, I'm not learning, I'm just doing this. Why am I doing this?
Well,
it's preparing by the way, you're learning a lot by even doing this, by the way, so for sure, learning and reading. But it prepares primarily, and then you can get so much more value when you read it.
And also, serendipitously, I now relate this to my Zettelkasten and higher order learning in general. When you pigeonhole a book, when you classify it as something in your mind, it is a lot easier to connect it to prior knowledge because you have an idea of what it could be related to in the process, and therefore you have more anchor points to stick it to, and the memory in general gets better encoded.
Okay, yeah, I get it now.
Yeah, sorry for my, like, I think I kind of responded a bit too. I kind of came out a bit too much, kind of assertive.
But no, it's fine.
Sorry if that was the case.
That's fine.
Yeah, but like, do you kind of understand, like, where I think this is kind of an important thing to do, and also the X-raying, which we're going to get into. You can kind of see this as, I think it's fine to kind of see this as almost a pre-studying, like how Justin Song would kind of describe
it.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah, so for people also, I think another person is here. I think it's kind of almost pre-studying for a book, basically. Okay, so we're like with 3 people right now, right? Oh, let me kind of close the stream. Yeah, so we can kind of and then it's X-raying, which is kind of a harder one, I think. And it's, like, it is about, like, again, as I said before, it's about stating the unity, and which basically means writing down in one sentence or a few sentences or a short paragraph at most. That's the rule, basically.
Yeah, that's what I usually do, a paragraph.
A paragraph-ish. Of what is the unity or what is the book about, which is different from saying what the book.
I will share something. So.
What pigeonholing is, pigeonholing is like saying what the book is, kind of the type of book, basically, whereas the unity of stating the unity. Again, this is kind of not from experience because I've not been doing this enough or have been doing this. But what Adler describes is like the unity would be like saying like what the themes or topics and the main points are in a few sentences, right? Which is different. It's kind of touching upon the contents a bit, but like in a okay. And so the other part of X-raying would be saying, well, this is like the unity. What are the different components and parts? If you were writing an essay, which I think we're all acquainted with when it comes to university or school or whatever, is if you were to make an outline for your essay, you would have the main thing you want to say in your essay. That's the unity, and it has to have a unity. If it doesn't have a unity, it's not a good essay. You won't get a good grade. But it also has components and parts which kind of are related to, right? So
I just encountered something actually. I have never I don't write down so far the unity of the book and stuff after my inspection or reading. I thought I did that, But apparently, I have done that. I do that in the review of my book. So basically, as an analytical reading, and I do that from memory. But like, I shared my review of the Black Swan. I just put it in the chat, and I have it there. The Unity.
Yeah. So what I'm thinking is maybe you don't do this while inspectional reading, and I think that you don't do this while inspectional reading. Though you could make an attempt at the Unity. But you're definitely going to revise it. It's not going to stay the same.
You will refine it once you have done your analytical reading or when you're busy.
But I think you can make an outline of the book as well. But the outline again is going to be very bare bones when inspectional. It's not going to be like very kind of, and you're going to build on top. I think as you're reading more analytically, you will kind of build on top of it and refine it and revise it.
It's a hypothesis that is very useful to prime your mind, but you should not
this is a very good point.
Let's stay in stone.
I will just write. By the way, I'm using my phone here because if I'm going on my iPad, my screen goes off, so I have to kind of use my phone to make notes here. Sorry. But I think your point is very good, Matthew, is that I think particularly, again, we said pigeonholing is definitely more inspectional.
Yeah.
And it's also what Adler said. And when doing the X-raying, you can do that when inspectional, but it's much more like a hypothesis, right?
Yeah.
Again, I think this probably also is the case with, like, again, you have to kind of make the parallel with pre-studying if there is any. If there's
pre-studying is most definitely a hypothesis. And it's usually, unless you're learning something really simple, it's usually something that gets revised very much later on.
Yeah, and
revision is usually part of the learning process. As you revise, you're basically doing a form of learning of, I wouldn't say retrieval, but you're basically processing the information deeper. So you're thinking, how does it relate to this? How does that relate, and how can you fix this?
Yeah. So I think we've clarified the question of like when to do an X-raying. I think you can definitely do that while doing an inspectional read. But again, do you have to? I don't think you have to do it, right? It's not as mandatory.
It is
to do it.
It's useful for the priming of the mind, but it is not essential, I think.
But once you said, if you want to do a good analytical, it's essential to do it, right? It's essential. So I think that's a good distinction to make. You can kind of do it when doing inspectional, but it'd be nice to do it so you can kind of revise it and build upon it as you do your analytical read. And this kind of ties back to the part 1 of page 51, where Adler makes the distinctions between types of note making. I think that was very fruitful when we were analyzing that. I think it's such an important few pages, by the way. I'm going to refer back to it, but again, he makes a distinction between note making structural. This is note making structural, right? Hoorn?
Yeah.
So basically, the note-making structural, I think you said like, it's specifically inspectional, which is not true. It's inspectional and analytical, in my opinion. Then, if you were to because if you were to revise and build upon and change the structure when doing analytical read, it's definitely inspectional and analytical, I think. And he was specifically pointing out to note-making when doing, hey bird!
Hey bird!
Dude, you're gonna scare him away. He's gonna fly away. So don't say it too hard. Yeah.
Loud.
So we were just talking about. I don't know if you have read it, but we were just talking about how to read a book. Chapter 6 and 7, which is part 2. Chapter 6 is about pigeonholing a book, which is basically classifying a book, and chapter 7 is about X-raying a book, which is basically creating a structure of a book. Saying what the unit is of a book, and then saying what the parts is of a book, basically. So kind of
in relation to the whole. That's an important point.
Yeah. But we were just, I think, at like the different kinds of note making. But conceptual would definitely be more about analytical reading.
Yeah.
And then the kind of, I think you talked about this, Matthew. It's about like understanding logic and so on, that kind of stuff, basically, right?
Yeah.
That kind of stuff. So. Yeah. Okay. So, Bert, are you, or like maybe you don't have voice? That's totally fine. You lost.
Oh, you were talking to me. Sorry. When I joined, it was kind of like audioless for a couple seconds. I didn't know who you were talking to.
Oh, didn't you hear what, or like was it audio basically?
I didn't hear who you were initially talking to, so I didn't realize you were talking to me when I joined. Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah, I have read Pigeonholing a book and X-Raying a book. I haven't read them deeply, but I have read done an
Okay, yeah, that's good enough. That's good enough. Yeah, that's great. And yeah, I don't know where we were left before you came. I'm kind of lost. But what kind of points were you making? Maybe. Yeah.
You were talking about X-raying the book. Basically comparing the parts to the whole. So that's where you left off. Then Matthew made a comment that it's important to connect the parts to the whole.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, so is there anything else that we're gonna cover besides that today?
Besides, like this.
Besides Pigeonhole and X-raying the book.
I think that was kind of what the topic is about, but we can kind of, we can kind of close it off. Maybe, maybe again make a few more points. Maybe if we want to kind of bring them up when it comes to these topics. But this book club this week was going to be very short. I think because there was not much. It's just 2 chapters. Basically.
I think next week will be a bit more in depth because next week we got into the nitty gritty of the of the thing.
Analytical reading, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, are we going to cover analytical reading next week or?
Well, not the entire part. I think it's 2 chapters again. Let me check real quick because I was kind of like looking at the things that were related together.
We can.
Like Pigeonholing and X-Raying are related. Coming to terms with an author and determining an author's message are related. And then you have criticizing a book fairly and agreeing or disagreeing with an author that are also related chapters. So I was like thinking of doing it in groups of 2.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm interested in the argument part. I think there's a part where it says determine the author's argument. And then evaluate it, something like that. I'm interested in that part.
I think that is basically chapters 8 and 9, and then the criticizing comes after that. So for next week, we will probably do chapters 8 and 9, but we will first continue to talk right now, I think. Bert, did you have any interesting thoughts when you were reading the Pigeonholing and X-Raying book chapters?
Just how inspectional reading kind of relates to pre-study and prepping a mind map, and
we're just talking the same. We're just talking about the same point, so it is exactly the same. Yeah,
and how that's useful.
Yeah,
and I quite liked how they built upon inspectional reading and what it taught you to do on the previous chapters a little bit.
Yeah.
Like before you get into analytical reading, you have to have an idea of where the book is going to fit in your head and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I think that's exactly what it does. And that's why I think it's kind of useful. Again, you have to pigeonhole the book even. Like, that's almost, I think, an inspectional just very useful to do that. But when it comes to the X-raying, I think it's useful because it really prepares you to read the book more deeply. If you were to have an idea of the unity and somewhat of the parts, I think. Because that's what when it comes to pre-studying helps you again to kind of, if you were to kind of get deeper into the topic, to do that. I think with reading a book as well. But we did conclude, Bert, that maybe X-raying is not as essential in inspectional reading, but it's very useful for that. So it's not like we need to do that, but like, yeah.
At least for inspectional reading, for analytical reading, it is essential.
Yeah, that's what we kind of talked about.
Right.
Yeah. That's good, yeah.
Yeah.
I've only gone over this chapter a little bit, but it feels like a
one thing which and one thing which while I was reading this I was trying to basically determine that's why I asked the question at the beginning. I was trying to determine the aim, right? because I'm used to Justin's methods, right? And everything that we do, that Justin tells us or instructs us or advises us to do, has a purpose. While you're making for example, when you're making the pre-study mind map, what you're doing is that you're basically priming yourself for the information or the deeper dive, which we'll do later on. And that is a part of learning, right? So while you're doing pre-studying, it might feel like you're just making a quick layout of the chapter or the topic, and it maybe you feel like you're just doing it because Justin says so, right? Actually, it has a purpose. It primes you. It helps you to learn. And when you revise that pre-made mind map or study mind map, you're learning again because you're refining the relationships between the concepts. And then when you go to a lecture, you get a different perspective, and you're basically. So the whole point is just that you're continuously learning and refining, and then that basically helps you to the entire topic.
Yeah, learning is an iterative process.
While I was reading this book, because I read How to Read a Book the first time. It's an iterative process. I'm reading, so it's cut off there. I think. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, but you crackle
Can you hear me?
with a little bit of static.
Yeah.
I think it's a network. Okay, so the first time I read How to Read a Book, I thought, okay, I'll apply everything in this book because it's by the conclusion I came to is that basically each successive technique, for example, analytical reading, encompasses itself as well as the previous part, and you use a technique based on the level of difficulty of the book. Basically, you don't need to use you don't need to use all the methods all on every book. Not on every book, but you don't need to use all the methods all the time. So, for example, you don't need to use if you do analytical reading, you don't need to do an inspection reading. That's what I got from my second reading. But those were just my thoughts. Yeah.
Okay, so I didn't quite get what you wanted to say exactly there. So, what did you want to say for? Because the first part was kind of more about like that there should be purpose of like techniques and methods, and that we should just blindly following this. I think the underlying, that's not what you said concretely, but that's kind of what underlined your talk there, I think. And then the last part is that the way you kind of understood your read of How to Read a Book the second time, which is basically that we don't have to do all the things all the time. Those kinds of two things you said, like, right? Okay. So is that what you wanted to say, or what was that something else?
Yeah, basically I think the first part you got it. The second part I was just trying to say that the purpose that I understood from How to Read a Book is just to basically give us different methods to use for different books of different difficulty, basically.
Yeah.
I didn't get the first time. I did not understand the purpose the first time.
Yeah. And how did that relate for you, like to the first part of what you wanted to say? I'm just interested in that. I kind of got what you wanted to say, by the way. So I think all was clear. But like, how did that relate to like the Justice Song thing? There should be purpose or something. You said something about that.
Yeah. So it basically made me question: is the aim of How to Read a Book? Is the aim of it to teach us how to learn the stuff that we read? Or is the aim to help us memorize the content? Is the aim to help us master the topic?
Yeah, I think this. I think this relates back to the article I wrote recently. Like, I think that How to Read a Book, most methods in it, particularly when it comes to analytical reading, are more optimized for what I would call intellectualism rather than efficient learning. Obviously, there's overlap, but I would say that they do not share the exact same purpose, because I think that Mortimer Adler, which I think mentioned in the article, he he says that criticizing, that evaluating whether or not the author is saying is true, is an essential part of analytical reading. You do not have done an analytical reading unless you have basically pointed out to the author where he was misinformed, if you could find it, where he was illogical, etc., and if what he said was true at all. Whereas Dr. Justin Sung / learning in general in formal education kind of assumes or even demands that you accept anything the teacher says as being true, whereas Mortimer Adler takes a more critical approach, where the job of the analytical reader is actually to determine if what the author is saying is true in the first place. Do you get what I mean?
I'd argue that a big part of learning is determining whether or not something is true, though.
Yeah, agreed. I think it's kind of a weird distinction you made. I think it's more about college and so on. But that's just a curriculum. But learning is much bigger than that. Like, it's not about, right? It's not about the classroom only. That's kind of a misrepresentation.
Yeah, I think it is a very useful distinction between intellectualism and learning, because I haven't encountered anything within efficient learning space, like coming to Dr. Justin Sung, etc., where they specifically tell you that one of the purposes, one of the objectives, is to determine whether something is true or not. The objective is to encode it in your mind in a really good way. That is basically what I'm getting from Dr.
Yes, but to be able to encode you don't want to encode something that isn't true. Part of the process is finding correct information.
Yeah, I get that, but
it's in the later.
I agree with your point. But I mean, who does that? Like, virtually nobody I know does that unless they're specifically instructed to do so.
It's taught in the later stages of inquiry.
May I add something here again? Yeah. I think it's I think that I'm just going to assume that you have mentally represented learning, particularly with also Justin Sung and like just learning techniques, but like a professor that reads, writes, researches, does intellectualism, whatever. He learns a tremendous amount because he's constantly speaking, teaching, writing, speaking, revising his text. He's going to write,
there's overlap.
reading. It is learning. Yeah,
I know.
It is learning.
Muhammad, one of the points I made in my article is basically that intellectualism transcends learning. It includes it, but it expands on it. That is what I was trying to say there.
Yeah, so how have people learning as well as physical thinking?
Because like most scientific definitions of learning that I have encountered so far are a change in the neural pathways, which are usually positive for the learner in the long term. So basically, any state that changes your brain is in that sense learning. It is encoded, the information. But that does not mean that there is no relationship, there is no demand to know whether something is true in the first place. You could be learning false information, but if it is encoded well, it has been learned. Whereas Adler's methods, and therefore what I would call intellectualism, there is a necessity to determine whether something is true or not, what an author is saying. You don't assume that the author is right all the time.
But the critical learner also asks himself the question. In my book, there is no distinction between being an intellectual and learner. The learner can be an intellectual and vice versa. If a learner wants to be effective, he should be critical of what he's learning, and he should just assume everything. I think what you're doing is you're saying that there is a certain type of learner who reads a lot, writes a lot, researches a lot, and that's called intellectualism. That's the term you coined. But it's just a certain type of learner that does that. I think it's kind of weird.
Intellectualism is just an interesting application of learning.
Exactly. That's how I view it. And it's kind of weird to kind of box them like this because it just isn't true. I mean, the person who is an intellectual, quote unquote, who reads a lot, researches a lot, writes a lot, learns a lot, right? So it's a learner basically by in virtue of like doing the thing. And so I think the distinction there is kind of weird.
Like if I go and learn efficiently like Dr. Justin Sung, I would not consider myself to be an intellectual. I do not consider Dr. Justin Sung an intellectual. Whereas I consider Niklas Luhmann, I consider him an intellectual through and through, but I don't consider him an efficient learner.
Okay, what's your definition of being an intellectual?
Read the article that I wrote recently, which is
I'm just asking you right now.
which,
No, I'm
yeah,
not going to read.
which is
I'm just
basically a
wanting to
rough
know right
draft,
now.
but I haven't expanded on it enough to formalize it yet.
Just a basic definition of like how you want to kind of frame it. Because if you were to make a distinction, you have to really get the definition right.
I mean
between the two.
that is what I'm trying to do, and whereas I will do more research about it because I have a few books on this. But like I said, there is overlap in the state. Like there is overlap in processes, but the objective is ultimately different, in my opinion. Because for learning, the objective, to my mind, is to encode it in the long term in your memory. The objective of intellectualism would be to basically to not only learn it and get it in memory, which is sometimes not even necessary, but also to be critical, to really be critical. And even in Bloom's taxonomy, you evaluate, you prioritize, you be selective, but you are not really necessarily judging. You are not saying, is this true or not?
3 points actually. 3 points actually. One, the distinction you made a while ago, which I haven't got around to making, was that with learning you don't determine whether or not something is true, and you haven't seen something in the course that says that. Stuff to do with Bear Hunter system involves finding sources, and part of finding sources is determining whether or not it is true. Point number 2, you just mentioned Bloom's taxonomy. Look at the link I just sent. 3, I get the distinction you're trying to make, but I wouldn't say that intellectualism transcends learning. I would say that intellectualism is an application, and it is a different. It has a different goal.
Yeah, we talked about this earlier when I posted the article. I know.
Yeah, if intellectualism is a different, if it has a different goal, it is different. It's a different process. You can't argue it transcends. You can argue that it's different.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this before, but I see it differently than you, but I haven't done enough research to actually justify my stand like publicly and formalize it. So I'm still busy with that, but I just wanted to mention it as an answer to Miwa's original question.
This is a good opportunity to kind of, again, make your thinking better.
Would you consider, for example, Albert Einstein an intellectual?
Yeah, definitely.
Richard Feynman?
Yeah, also. From what I know, like from what I know.
Okay, well, from my understanding of them, because I'm very interested in physicists, they're extremely good learners, and then they took the information they learned, and then they applied it. It's an application of learning.
Yeah, perhaps
I understand. I understand the attempts to make a distinction, and it is interesting learning something without having an application for it. Sure, that's a fair point. It's a bit of an interesting distinction to try to say that intellectualism transcends if intellectualism can't exist without.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird one for me, because again, I couldn't imagine an Albert Einstein and a Feynman not being good learners. Again, by the person that I think the image you want to craft, like just my assumption, right? You have to kind of correct it if it's wrong. But the image you want to craft is a person, particularly researchers and professors, is kind of the stereotypical
that's intellectual. The vibe.
It is true.
Yeah, it's the vibe, the energy.
That's the vibe. And that's generally true, but like I'm not saying that archetype is the only intellectual. There are many intellectuals, but like I think the image you want to create is that this person is curious, reads books, writes or wants to write, wants to teach or speak, and wants to kind of engage in deeper conversations and read the classics and so forth. Again, but for me, this is also a cultural thing to some degree. Again, I'm not going to get into that, but like that's a kind of almost a cultural image of like what an intellectual would look like and how it would be. But if you just look at the bare bones, it's just a person who learns through all these different media, basically, and engages with the world.
But that
by
is
engaging
why,
with the world.
Like that is also why I said that intellectualism transcends learning. It includes it, but expands on it. You cannot be an intellectual without being able to learn.
That's what you said. You literally said what the bird said about expanding. Or not expanding, or like kind of an application. But expanding, what do you mean with expanding? Because I think what Bird is saying in application, which I agree much more, and you say expanding. Yeah. What do you mean with expanding?
With expanding, I mean that it gives additional things. Like I said, learning, in my mind, does not demand that you find out the truth of something. intellectualism and critical thinking does demand that you find out whether it is. It is more skeptical in that sense.
To learn efficiently, you need to use critical thinking. 1, 2. A big part of being an efficient learner is determining whether or not what you are learning and how everything relates is true or not. So that argument is a bit iffy. Secondly, from what you from that whole professor's argument, the biggest distinction I can give learning and intellectualism is that learning is a tool and intellectualism is pretty much making. Like, you can use learning to get good at math, but your goal is just to get good at math. Whereas intellectualism is more of a bringing learning to the front of that. It's the best distinction I can give because of the whole professor's point. I wouldn't argue that there is.
If I remember correctly, in my article, I also made the argument that learning, in that sense, is more of a process, whereas intellectualism would be more of a vocation.
I agree that it's more of a lifestyle. So I would definitely see that intellectualism or being an intellectual by that. But you can also be a learner, so that's also a certain vocation and a lifestyle. So you can just change the words into like a thing.
And
what I would say is that right now, at this point in time, I know in my heart that they are different, but I have not enough knowledge to formalize it.
Exactly. Again, and they can be different, but that's what Bert is pointing out. I think that I agree with him. It's like it's an application. By saying it's an application, it is different to a sense, right? Because it's a certain taste of it, but it's not like. It's not a different process going on. Your brain is still there. It still makes connections to the world.
Maybe, but in my mind, intellectualism in that sense has a certain sense of greatness to it, whereas learning does not. So if I say that intellectualism is just an application of learning, it is not as great in my mind.
Yeah. Just for the people that are still watching on YouTube, I just want to we're going off track. I think we have finished debating this book, so we're just going to go off track and we're going to talk about this debate, which is interesting, right? So
yeah, maybe if we could relate it to how to read a book in a sense, if you just if someone picks up the article I wrote and just shares it, and then we can kind of combine it.
Can you share it in the chat? Have you shared your article?
Yeah, I have shared it in the general chat a while ago. If you just type in intellectualism.
Right now, can you share it right now? Because I don't want to search the.
Okay, sure. I'll share it in the chat. Give me 1 second.
I'll make an interesting argument. Instead of trying to make such a distinction, an interesting way of thinking about it would be because
it's shared
intellectualism.
In the voice chat.
Pardon?
No, I said to Muhammad, it's shared in the voice chat.
Because you said that learning is more of a process and intellectualism is more of a vocation, then certain processes and certain things can be turned into vocations. By that, and because of how close they are, wouldn't an intellectual just be someone whose vocation is learning and is the things related to learning? Like,
yeah.
Give me 1 second. I'm going to take go to the toilet real quick and fill my water bottle. I'll be back in a few minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, me too. And I think we should just then maybe finish this debate and then maybe talk about a few other things, and then we're just gonna close it. So I'm also gonna quickly go.
Okay. Oh the God, I was actually gonna go to join my sister before we finish this argument, this debate, but that's fine.
This was an interesting debate.
Yeah, it was, and it's. But I just wanted to. What I wanted to understand was just the purpose of how to read a book, really. And I think that's when they got a bit sidetracked and started talking about intellectualism versus learning. For me, I just understood. It as. Yeah.
I quite like how to read a book. I just think it's a little too stuffed with stuff that isn't necessarily useful for my applications.
Yeah, me too, exactly. Because my reason for reading it was just to, I think it was just to understand how to better read books so that I can learn better, right? I wanted to understand, I wanted to see how Mortimer Adler, how he reads books, and then how that contributes to his learning and understanding of things. But I'm not so sure if it actually helps with that purpose. That's why I wanted to understand what is the purpose for him even writing. I mean, I get the purpose. He states it a few times in the book. He says that he wants to help readers of books, but help them to do what exactly? To learn, help them to become lifelong learners. Maybe help them to do research. I don't. Those are examples, but I just couldn't quite get it. Uh, that's why. But maybe I'll just read the book again and then just try and find some way.
I just think some
Way.
parts of the book are unnecessary. Most of it's great. Just some parts don't fit my needs.
Yeah, and it's I think you're right about that. And he was a philosopher, and so philosophers usually they like to write out their thoughts, and then maybe some of the stuff that he wrote was not really that useful for us.
Oh, Mr. Hoorn has returned.
Yes, I have, and there comes Muhammad.
Or
should we say Mr. Ali?
You should read the thing I posted in the general group chat. General chat.
I'll read that a bit later. Yeah, fine.
Yeah. So what is the?
Yeah, so what I was thinking about doing, that's why I shared it in the voice chat, like my article, is like if we want to relate the debate to how to read a book in a sense, we could, or well, I don't know if I would call it a debate, but we like if you could just share your screen while we go through it, like read what I wrote. Actually, that was my idea, basically.
Not right now, personally, because I think I'm just gonna read it in my own time. I think that's much better. I mean, reading along is also. It didn't work the previous time, so I wouldn't do that right now personally. But
I mean, it's not that.
Like, I definitely saved the art. I definitely saved the article, so we'll look into it. Yeah, I don't have any other comments than saying that like what the point. The moment you said it, I was like, I already kind of disagree because I think I get the distinction. But it's almost, I think intellectualism is also like an archetype kind of thing. It's kind of a lifestyle, kind of cultural kind of thing that developed. And again, I think it's more of a taste of learning rather than being like this kind of godly and divine thing that you're almost making it out to be. So that's kind of my critique of because I think that's what you're almost doing. I think that's kind of a weird way to look at it, but that's my 2 cents, my conclusion, and I'm not going to say anything more deep into it. I think I said everything I wanted to say, so yeah. Anyone? Or are we done?
I don't know. Source has muted himself.
I just think it's an interesting comparison, and it's a bit of an iffy distinction.
Agreed.
Hello, girl. I don't know who specifically joins, but
yeah,
and gone.
Gone.
Yeah. So, if there are any other things to bring up, or we can just close it, maybe. If anyone wants to kind of bring up a thing, maybe we can talk about Zettelkasten a bit because I think Me1 is here in bird, and it's like two stones in one. Two
birds with one stone is the saying.
Two birds. Hey, birds.
But Source has muted himself, so I don't know if he's saying something or not.
He's Me1. I mean, he's gonna be ever Me1 in my books. He's not gonna be Source. I won't acknowledge him as Source.
I'm just trying to sort out my templates for it.
I was gonna send you.
You were,
I didn't send you shit, did I?
Nope.
I need to send you that. Sorry, man. Oh, my camera is gone. Where's my camera?
Is your profile picture your actual face?
What?
Is your profile picture your actual face? I never noticed.
I don't get no, it's I don't know. I don't look. I look much uglier in real life, as you can see.
Your beard.
My beard?
It looks like the profile picture.
Do you think I was the other person on my profile picture, or like what do you?
That's what I was. That's what I was saying.
So if you look at my profile picture, it looks like another person to you.
No, I was saying it's the same person.
You're talking about me, right?
Yeah, I was asking if it's the same person. I was asking if it was you.
But so there's an assumption that it wasn't me, maybe.
I was asking if it was you because a lot of people don't use their own face as their profile picture.
No, I'm definitely not as old as Mortimer.
Okay, so my question is if you're looking at it, what do you think? You're asking the question, but there's a certain doubt in the question, some degree of doubt. So you're not sure, right? That's just what
I think your beard matches.
Yeah, but if you just look at it, what do you get from it? Do I look like it? Yes or no?
I don't know.
But can't you tell, just by looking at it,
it's a nicely taken photo, and then
Oh
you're in horrible lighting.
What? What did you say at the end?
And then
what?
And now currently you're in horrible lighting, so I can't tell.
Oh, yeah, my face doesn't look good.
Because in one your face is glowing, and now there's just very shadowy, so I can't actually tell anything.
Yeah, it's just a professionally taken picture, but it's me. So now you have the answer. It's kind of hard to get it out of you, or get it out of me. I mean, but yeah. Okay, so how's Zettelkasten, the templates? Are you already guys doing something? Can I help? Maybe Mr. Hoorn? Maybe you can kind of talk about that a bit. I don't know. It's also intellectualism in Mr. Hoorn's terms.
Yeah, definitely. Zettelkasten is intellectualism, definitely.
It's not learning. It's bizarre, but yeah. What do you want to say?
I want to start numbering my notes, but we'll do that next week. It's fine.
Yeah, we can. Again, we shouldn't talk about that indeed, but yeah, you want to number, and why do you want to make that move of numbering?
I want to number it because I think it would just be more useful.
Okay, yeah, no problem. You can do that.
Yeah. Yeah, because I linked them.
Yeah, you say those things.
Yeah, sorry, I kind of said words early, so I think Mimon was gonna finish his point.
Yeah, I was just I linked them. I want to number them because I think it would be more useful, and I'll be able to make more interesting connections that way.
Yeah, that's totally fine. By the way, I'm just gonna steal something, but can I screen share? Yeah, I think for you guys, all of you're interested in Zettelkasten. This is major, and I've already read the book once. So
you're talking about Bob Logos, probably.
Yeah, and I'm gonna shield it here because why not? Because we can, right? Can you see my screen, guys?
Yes.
Yeah, let me see. Open link. I'm gonna also share you the link. So this book, for you, buy or read this book. This book is major. If you want to kind of really get serious, again, you always have me, so I will constantly help you. But I think if you were to read this book alongside with me as well, you'd be set up with the Zettelkasten very quickly. It really gives you a good overview of everything.
Does it also go in analog method?
It doesn't. Yeah, but it's kind of medium independent, as in it doesn't really matter.
Okay,
right?
That's good.
So it's not we're just talking about digital. No. It's just about the Zettelkasten method.
Okay.
And if you're talking about the object, of course, there's a difference between an analog and a digital one.
Mm-hmm.
So that is there. But I think this is an interesting book to get into for you guys.
It's kind of expensive for an ebook, but okay.
But there's an ebook version.
Yeah, but I'm saying it's kind of expensive for an ebook version because usually books in an ebook is €3 or something.
Yeah, it is what it is. Let me send you the link and then Then that is that, I think. So I don't have anything else to say.
That
Do you
one's
guys
also
have kind of... Yeah?
I was just saying that one's also kind of partially will be more expensive because it's new.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah. So
I do have a question though.
Yeah.
Ask.
Can you send me the note thing you were going to send me?
the note templates?
Yeah,
How do
the
I
thing
send it
that just
effectively? Okay, I will
I
go
have
to
no
my
idea.
template.
You can
Okay,
just
I will
send
go. I will do it right now.
You can just send the markdown file.
Yeah, I will try to do that. Let me see. So the main note and the reference note, right? Something like that, I think.
Yeah,
How
and
do I
the other thing you were going to send me, I don't remember.
I mean,
what
on
it was,
computer
but you
it's
said you were gonna send-
on computer it's very easy to share like a markdown file, but on a tablet or iPad, maybe you should just copy and paste the entire source.
the markdown files are fine.
Let me see 1 second, man. Copy. What is happening here?
My tablet's basically like a laptop.
Yeah, I know, but maybe Muhammad cannot find the file itself.
Yeah,
like, in that
it's
way.
kind of. I can find the share, but it's copy pasting, which is not what I wanted to do. Okay, this is kind of annoying. Let me try this.
That thing I was reading is very interesting though, because it's like a comparison between Solo and Bloom's taxonomy.
Oh yeah, that's
Oh, it worked, right? Bird,
Huh?
it worked.
2 seconds.
1, 2.
I said it to Bird private, so
Yeah,
guys
I
can.
noticed.
Yeah, that one looks fine.
Yeah, and I also sent you another one, which is.
I should just be able to open it and then it'll be good.
Yeah, do you also want the reference note, the literature note template?
No,
yes,
it's
please.
literature note is a wrong term. It's a bibliography note.
No, that's just bullshit. That's like utterly bullshit. I mean, again, Hoorn, like, so you can say what you want, like, but like that's just.
Yeah, no,
like,
I'm joking.
I don't know what you're basing. Okay, but again, if you were like honest, I don't know what you were basing it upon, but that's just bullshit.
I know. I was
Yeah,
I was just joking to annoy you because it's basically something that Shepard would say.
Yeah, and that's just stupid. But yeah, that's. I will send you the reference note as well.
I feel like pizza.
I'm going to make hamburgers.
Where can I? Okay, the Discord thing. Hopefully, I can find it.
I'm gonna make pizza in a frying pan.
Oh, that's interesting.
It's pretty good. It's pretty good. I don't have a pizza oven, so.
Yeah, so I sent it. Is it good, or was there anything else?
Yeah, it's a markdown file, so it's fine.
By the way,
But if you just open it, like, can you? Yeah.
I mean, up until now, I did not know that, that Mi1's new profile picture was actually graphs. Because earlier, when I just saw it like really small from far away, I always thought it was like a music note or something.
I knew it was a graph immediately after looking, so it's on your part.
Yeah, because I did not see that. I thought it was a music note.
I never saw a music note.
Yeah,
Like, what the fuck?
Yeah, it was a graph, yeah.
Yeah, it's a graph.
Yeah.
A graph of what?
It was a graph for?
What
So
is it of? Yeah, what is it of?
Oh, it's just a graph I found online. But the aim was just to show like most of the information in our mind is stored as graphs also. Which is what basically the realization I came to. But whenever I mention it, it seems like people are not really that interested, so I'm like, okay, let me just move on then.
How is information stored in our mind as a graph?
Your mind stores a world model, a model of the world.
Yeah.
It cannot store your room, for example. Your room, Muhammad. Your mind can't store everything in that room. It can't store all the pixels. basically the light waves that come to your eyes and the locations of everything. It cannot store all that.
Yeah.
What it does is it turns information into graphs, and then it turns them into multiple layers of graphs. So, for example, the locations in your room will be stored as a graph in your mind. It's called a place cell, basically a graph. And whenever you move from one location to another, you are moving from one of the graph to another point in your mind.
Yeah.
Kind of understand?
Muhammad, you need to read Rodrigo Kian Quiroga's The Forgetting Machine. It's
I've read it.
Yeah,
it's knowledge history, right? Knowledge management history.
No.
Or what are you talking about?
No, that's Forgetting Machines. That is Forgetting Machines. That I have not read yet. I'm talking about The Forgetting Machine.
The titles are very similar.
Yeah, I know. I know it's confusing, but it's
Forgetting Machine. Let me see.
Yeah, it's written by Rodrigo Kian Quiroga, and it goes basically in a more accessible way into the neuroscience of the brain, how the memory or how the brain stores information, memory, etc. I reference this a lot in my texts when I write usually.
Is it a good book, or like do you know that me one?
Yeah, I know it. It's an interesting book. You should definitely read it. But it doesn't really explain what I just explained. The Forgetting Machine basically explains how your mind stores memories. That's most of the book, and it goes into detail. Well, not too much detail, but it goes into interesting enough depth that you understand a bit more about short-term memory and long-term. But what I'm talking about is more so how your mind encodes information from the world, as basically as graphs or as shapes. And your mind is really incredible. It can store information as anything. So it can encode those faces as shapes, for example.
Yeah, the relationship that I made between what you were saying and the book I mentioned is the book mentioned something like that whenever you get a new stimuli, there are certain neurons that light up, that fire, like your mind. And in that way, if you connect the neurons that are connected, you get the edges, which, like, if you would represent that in a 2D paper, you would get a graph. Actually, that's the connection I made.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. So your mind basically has a neuron, it has a neuron for every single, almost every detail that comes to your senses. From sound, it has a neuron for every sound. It has a neuron for every color, for every, for different kinds of shade. It has a neuron for people's faces, for people's names, and that's why I think the mind has like something like, I'm trying to remember the number now. I think 10 billion neurons, and then the connections between the neurons goes up to like I think a trillion connections, synaptical connections. So it's a lot of information, and it's all to store, and also it does it in multiple layers. So if I can just quickly take a small sidetrack.
You were.
The brain stores. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was about to say, like, earlier today you wrote something like, if only we could create bigger minds, and I was about to respond like with, it is not really about the size, because the Forgetting Machine, which we are talking about right now, it actually gives the interesting comparison that at the end of our lives we have stored, like, maybe I don't remember the exact number, but something like 200 gigabytes worth of data, if you would call it like that, or 2 gigabytes. I don't remember the exact number. Whereas our brain can store several magnitudes more. So we don't even use all the space that we can use. So in that sense, it's not all about size. It's more so about the efficiency of using information and storing it, I think.
Yeah, that's true. It's also about because whales have larger brains than us.
Yeah,
and also I think elephants. Yeah. That's why you said good. I didn't hear what you said.
I was just gonna say 100 billion neurons.
Ah.
Yeah. So there's more neurons than us also, and so people think that to be smarter, but actually it's also about the design of the brain. So we have humans have the largest neocortex, which is the front part of your brain. We have the largest one compared to our entire brain size. So that's why
The
we're the smartest.
neocortex is kind of just part of the entire brain.
Yeah, and it's used for like those higher cognitive functions. But my point was basically that like your brain stores information in multiple layers, right? And the point of the multiple layers is that it basically takes simple concepts and combines them together to make a higher concept, kind of like we make definitions, right?
Yeah,
We'll take, for example,
you're talking about the concept of chunking, I think?
yeah, chunking basically. Chunks smaller concepts together, make a more sophisticated concept, and then those higher concepts interact with each other. Yeah, so it's interesting. But my point in the chat was just that the reason why AIs like ChatGPT and Gemini they seem smart, but then they make such silly mistakes and they don't understand math at all is because we are storing information of one kind, which is text only, and then we're expecting it to know about the whole world based on that, and it doesn't make sense. That's why it keeps hallucinating, and it can't really reason like we can. So that was just my argument, yeah. Yeah, I can see people are getting tired, so we can just end this stream.
No, I wasn't tired per se. So I mean, that was totally fine. It was totally fine. I'm just chilling here basically because I kind of talked a lot here.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of. I'm just curious. It's really interesting stuff. I was curious if this is also. I don't think this depth has like if you. I'm really planning on doing the iCanStudy, like here and thereabouts.
Yeah,
like
I mean, like
and
as far
Bird has spurred me on as well, so I will shout out to him.
I wanted to say, like, as far as I know, maybe Bird can correct me, but I don't think iCanStudy is very practical in that sense, but it is not really theoretical as far as I know. It doesn't go into the nitty-gritty detail of how the brain works.
That's what Bird roughly said. I think you said roughly something like that to me, or you said like there's much more. Right?
What it talks about it decently, and it goes into a good amount of depth. But no, there is a lot more to learning science, and there's more ways to approach learning than iCanStudy teaches. No matter what you do, though, you're going to end up taking like half of what iCanStudy teaches anyway, so it's beneficial regardless. It's just for example, they don't teach certain things to do with procedural and declarative memory and all that kind of stuff. So there's another way to approach it.
Yeah, and that's actually not a critique of iCanStudy. It's basically, it's always going to be the case. If you choose if you have a course and you're going to structure it, you can't ever include everything. That's just impossible. You structure it in a certain way, and you have to omit things. And of course, he has a certain approach to probably learning and studying. And so, yeah. So what we're seeing here is definitely not a critique at all. It's actually much more. It's
more of a compliment.
Probably, right?
Yeah, I've read a bunch about learning science, and from what I can tell, all of them approach chunking in a different way to iCanStudy, though, which is interesting.
Okay, yeah.
For example, a Mind for Numbers talks about chunking and just sort of like taking a chunk of information and putting it in your head. Well, that's like a really, really dumbed down explanation, but it's a lot different to the way iCanStudy teaches chunking.
How do they explain that? Because I actually have no clue how they. So I have not done the. What does it mean? Chunking.
Chunking in like iCanStudy is grouping information together.
In which way?
In a way that it can be encoded for the mind map.
So, for example, you would, if I were to have a plain text file, I could make a heading called fruits, and then I would have bullet points under it, like strawberries,
like 2 bullet
and
points.
so forth. Yeah, a few bullet points, and then that would be a chunk, right? Of like the chunk is basically it's kind of fruits, and then there are like a few fruits, and that's like the chunk, kind of, right? Is that true?
Yeah, but the way a mind for numbers, for example, would approach it is you would, for before going to bed, you would solve, say, a worksheet of math that's got a bunch of interleaved math questions, and when you go to sleep and wake up the next morning, and if that's happened in a way that things can be reinforced in your head properly, that's now been chunked in your brain that you can recall it and use that information organically.
Interesting.
That's a very different way to look at it. Right?
Yeah, it's way different. They also talk about interleaving somewhat differently. It's not so differently to say that iCanStudy does it wrong, but differently enough to say that iCanStudy doesn't teach every application of interleaving.
Yeah, I myself always get confused between the about the nuanced differences between interleaving and varied practice, because they are different, but not very different.
And can I also bring up another point, which is kind of related to this? Is like I've heard from Matthew a lot, but like when it comes to like intellectualism, I'm going to use the term anyways. And this is what Matthew has said a lot. It's like, they don't really do that like iCanStudy, right? Which I think, when I do look at it, I think Matthew has a point in that they don't do like reading, writing, researching, kind of Zettelkasten. He's kind of, just to say, has even made use of criticism about Obsidian and Zettelkasten.
Without actually understanding what it's about.
Exactly. Also. Yeah, so I'm kind of interested in that, why it isn't in, of course, why would those things not be in there? Because the most, I think, the smartest people, one of the smartest people, are people that are very good, are people that are very good teachers, write very well, speak very eloquently, read a lot, and so forth.
Yeah, I suspect the primary reason for this is that the primary audience of Dr. Justin Sung, and actually iCanStudy, the company, is like high school students. There are some like in university level, etc. There, but their Zettelkasten would be immensely useful in university, I think.
I'm not only talking about
and there's also like a small group of professionals, but this primary audience, nevertheless, is still high school students.
I'm not only talking about Zettelkasten. Yeah, I'm not only talking.
Yeah, I know, but like grouping it together.
There are many professors of me that have no fucking clue what even a Zettelkasten is.
Yeah, I know.
But I'm talking about that. What I just said. Like, I think Bert was gonna say something about that.
Sorry, I got off track with listening to you guys, but Justin has a YouTube short saying that nothing's wrong with Zettelkasten as a system, but how people use it.
And which is also kind of weird, but like, what does he mean with that? Like, how does he doesn't even understand the system? Like, he doesn't even know what it is. Like, just gonna be honest, right? He doesn't even know what it is. And the long history, like the problem with the Zettelkasten is that it's
here though we don't know that you can't.
From what I've yeah, okay, but from what I've seen, from what he's told in those videos, and I've watched those videos, he doesn't clearly understand what a Zettelkasten is, because he from what I saw and how he explained it, he's just going off on the general kind of discourse on Zettelkasten, which is also pretty unfounded on many levels, and they don't have a clue. They either attribute Luhmann being the Zettelkasten godfather, which is also just a fucking false claim, because he's not the originator of the Zettelkasten. There's a big cultural history of the Zettelkasten, basically. And of course, the way the Zettelkasten is fashioned in this, let's say, in this digital age, is with these linked note-making tools, which has just been recent for like a decade or so. It's just quite a new thing.
Not a decade. It got like half a decade, because it originated around Dr. Zonke Armen's book, which took off in 2020. So it's basically from around 2020 that all that digital note-taking came to be.
No, that's not true, because the archive of like Sasha Voss and so on has been already present, and already using
like
tools,
that it got so popular as this.
Okay, it doesn't matter, but this is kind of a detail. But okay, it's kind of roughly speaking what you said and what I said, right? It's kind of both true. You can kind of use different timelines, totally fine. But I think Justin goes off on that discourse, but there are many people don't even know what it is. They even think that you can kind of put tasks in your shoebox and so on, or like your like keys, your physical car keys in the Zettelkasten. Like someone just commented in the Discord server, like, "Oh my god, I'm putting what I ate today in my Zettelkasten." I'm like, dude, what the fuck? Like that's not what a Zettelkasten is, man.
Yeah.
Like that's so. My point basically being is that I'm not blaming Justin. I'm just blaming the general discourse because people have a very limited understanding of Zettelkasten. They don't know what it is. So Justin going off on the general discourse of what a Zettelkasten is has very limited knowledge, and I get that, right? But then to make the claim, to say, I don't know what he said, but like, yeah, but it's a reference system. It's something like that, along those lines, he said, I think.
I
Management
think that more people online, not just not specifically.
It's weird.
I mean, not specifically to Dr. Justin Sung, but I think that a lot of people on the internet should adhere like to Charlie Munger's principle. I never allow myself to have an opinion about anything that I don't know the opponent side's argument better than they do, and I would change have an opinion to express an opinion. But that would solve a lot of stuff online.
Yeah, and so back to you, Bert, because I think this is what I think, and again, you might say it's an assumption, and I don't know what he thinks, but like from what he said in the video, that's the only thing I can go off on. So if you want to give me an opinion, I'm just giving my opinion based on what he gave me, and this is what I think. He has a very limited understanding of the Zettelkasten, which is not his fault because it's a general discourse, but anyway, it is a limited understanding. And he attributes it being as a reference system. The way he uses it is probably, if he has a system for Zettelkasten, which I think he doesn't. He does use Obsidian, but yeah. So, and again, Zettelkasten the thing is, Zettelkasten, it is such a long history. Many people, again, misattribute it to Luhmann, and so they think they have to do it exactly like Luhmann, which is also stupid, because the Zettelkasten can be much more versatile, and it's a much more broad and versatile practice.
I would still do it in the Luhmannian sense, but I would never argue that Luhmann created Zettelkasten. I would say that he maybe popularized it in a sense, but...
Yeah, but like, if you just my last comment, but if, for example, I think Chris Aldrich had a good debate with Sasha Foss, and I'm like 100% with Chris here, is that like Eminem had a Zettelkasten. He had a shoebox where he put notes in, inspiration for his lyrics. That for me is a Zettelkasten.
Oh, Eminem! Eminem, the artist. I thought you were referring to the candy Eminem, the chocolate.
No, the rapper.
Yeah, I know what you mean now.
He has a shoebox, and he calls it Stacking Ammo.
Album 2 days ago.
Huh? What? Yeah, true. And like a track, I think he released earlier, like called Houdini or something.
This is some shady coup de grace.
Yeah. Maybe we'll check it out. So my whole point here is that the discourse is fuzzy on Zettelkasten, which is it doesn't do its service, and people have thus a kind of a limited or bad understanding of the topic, which is fine. I get that because the discourse isn't good on it. I think personally, but there's some good stuff on it, and from what I can tell, Justin doesn't really understand it that well, which is fine. But do you think that I'm making a big assumption? I'm just getting it wrong, or like?
I think his argument, which is something I mostly agree with, is the fact that Zettelkasten isn't optimized for learning.
No, it's optimized for intellectualism.
Regardless, which is
so about that, like, yeah, sorry, just go ahead.
The argument he was making is that for learning, Zettelkasten isn't as useful as what he teaches, which I agree with. He doesn't say that Zettelkasten doesn't have uses or can't be used for its intended purposes, just that for learning specifically, it isn't ideal. Which is something
what does that mean? What is the implication? What does that mean?
I also agree in a sense that Zettelkasten is not... efficient, like the most efficient for learning. Graph mapping is more efficient with that, but it does have learning side benefits, especially if you use it in the way that I would advise it.
First of all, which time skill are we talking about? And second of all, the Zettelkasten is so dynamic that learning does happen. Of course, it happens, but it's a much different thing. Again, if you have a learning outcome, if you have, let's say, a course curriculum, you go to university, you have like 8 weeks of a program, which is like just all the university students have that, and then you have to learn a certain topic, read a bunch of things, whatever. Then Zettelkasten is definitely not optimal.
Unless you already have a lot of information on the topic, no.
No, probably not. So I don't use my Zettelkasten in that way. I don't make Zettelkasten notes and start linking them for my university. It would be stupid because you might have not even a good idea of like what the topic is about, and then making a notes about it and stating ideas without any kind of good knowledge on it. Again, that's not how the Zettelkasten works. It has a very specific function, which it doesn't exactly do well on like a certain learning outcome. You want to learn this topic by that time frame. Again, so there are like a lot of nuances when it comes to that. And if you say efficient learning, I don't know what that means. That's kind of a fuzzy term to me. I mean, maybe Justin did kind of define that in his course, but it's kind of a weird term for me. Like, what does efficient mean? Maybe I'm just being kind of annoying here, but
not the amount of learning in the optimal amount of time. The max amount of learning you can achieve in the minimum amount of time.
Okay.
That's efficiency.
I think the Zettelkasten, on the opposite end, is much more about how you engage with the world, and so learning happens constantly with like a Zettelkasten system in place. And the thing with Zettelkasten is it only, in my opinion, works well, like much better if you have good reading practices and writing practices, and you combine those with each other. You're constantly learning because you're constantly spitting out ideas, linking them, writing them, thinking, reading. So it's a very dynamic process of learning, which is constantly happening. It doesn't have a specific outcome,
I think
right? But it's constantly happening.
I mean,
so it's a very different nature.
Yeah, I mean, Zettelkasten specifically is more powerful in the long term. It's a long-term investment. That, first of all, it is always at least on the analytical level of Bloom's taxonomy, probably on evaluative usually, and it is used for the preparation of creation, which is the last stage of Bloom's taxonomy. But the funny thing is, at least Niklas Luhmann, if we are talking about the Luhmanian Zettelkasten, he specifically created the Zettelkasten, or he started using the Zettelkasten to bypass his faulty memory, he was saying. But in the end, he became such a professional / expert on his topic, sociology, that when he was talking in debates and stuff, he was ahead, sometimes even far ahead of his debate partners, even though he did not use like what we would call optimal learning techniques. He used the Zettelkasten, but that increased his knowledge mastery so much that he was basically like one of the biggest experts in the world on this topic.
Yeah.
I'm gonna make a statement and then an argument. I don't fully agree with either of you on the last points you made. And my argument is, for Muhammad specifically, this one, learning can happen in the way you just said, but the problem is learning requires higher order thinking and optimal thinking, and grind maps force that. Zettelkasten can use that, but a lot of people aren't going to do that, whereas the grind map will force them to.
I agree on that.
My argument to Mr. Hoorn / Matthew is I don't agree that Zettelkasten is as useful in the long term for everything. I agree that it's more useful in the long term for a broad expansion, like expansive topics. But if you were to say someone is studying immunology and only immunology and using Zettelkasten compared to grind maps over the course of their studies, I would argue that grind maps would fare just as well or better, and in the short term have better effects, meaning that it would be better.
In the short term, definitely. But if you're talking about becoming a world-class master on a topic with, say, decades of research, like 30 to 40 years with thousands of sources, and you want to compare all those notes almost instantaneously, a grind map does not cut that. A Zettelkasten will.
Exactly.
The source of the point, yes. The learning point, no. You having all the sources from the Zettelkasten, yes. That is a good point. The learning, no.
Yeah,
I would
I
argue
can agree on that.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
in the
but, like,
short term, the person doing the grind maps will be better, and in the long term, the person doing the grind maps will be just at least equal. The Zettelkasten will have benefits of having sources and points to other things, but the person doing the grind maps will likely have a very deep understanding because of the fact that they're being forced
that's
to
true,
fail.
but it's also worth mentioning, of course, that both
Yeah.
systems aren't mutually exclusive. You can use both in the same system / workflow.
Joke, Grindlecasten.
Can I make another point? Because the thing I think with the grinder mapping and like iCanStudy, I actually don't know anything of it, so I'm gonna make a bunch of assumptions and you have to correct me if there is anything. But I think that with the grinder mapping, it's again, you're kind of being very specific with maybe a topic or whatever. Like you're gonna learn something for a university course wherever. Whereas I think if you have a good like reading system, again, doing writing alongside Zettelkasten is a good idea, right? Content or whatever kind of output, thinking, speaking as well, kind of to kind of have those ideas, kind of recall them. That's what I do. A lot of things I say comes from that.
Yeah.
But like, okay, I'm not done yet, so I've not made my point. So please don't butt in, because again, sometimes I lose my train of thought when you do that.
Go ahead.
And I've already kind of lost my train of thought a bit here. But what I think is that, like, I've lost my train of thought, thanks. Not probably your fault, but still it happened. I think the Zettelkasten doesn't really discriminate. It's just kind of, you're just kind of engaging with the world. An idea comes here, you read something there, and you kind of fit an idea there. I use an index system, which is maybe even more important than my Zettelkasten. I'm gonna be straight. I think it's even more starting to be more essential to my system, even on the Zettelkasten. Yeah, probably, maybe. I think so. I find this, but like, yeah, basically by doing that, it goes much more broad and it doesn't really discriminate. It's just you're engaging with the world in whatever way. The problem, I think, that's why it doesn't work well for, let's say, a course curriculum, like for 8 weeks, because it's not trying to kind of hone in on something like this.
Mhm.
It's just going here and there. But this, and doing this kind of, again, much more free flowing movement is much more beneficial for just an all day thinker. It's just thinking, reading, writing. It kind of aggregates, basically. It aggregates over time, and it kind of builds your character, and the ideas start to kind of merge within your psyche, basically. This kind of thing. It's very hard to achieve, I would say, with like a grinder mapping with specific topic outcome in mind, basically. Yeah, again, I'm making assumptions. You have to correct me if I'm making wrong things.
That's like
this is what I think.
That's what I was saying. Indeed, the intellectual vocation, like that's Zettelkasten essential, like ideal for in that sense. But also, like with a grind map, you don't really make in that sense. It's not as easy to do cross-topical connections in the sense. Of course, you can expand a little on the topic you are doing, but it's not like you suddenly make a connection to something you learned 25 years ago in a completely different field, which is a very unique connection that can turn the entire view of the world around the topic on its head. While with the Zettelkasten, those kind of connections can happen pretty regularly depending on what you read and how you think.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. Like both have cases, it's just like the specific points you made, I don't agree with. Mm-hmm. There can be an argument made for Zettelkasten's use effectiveness over grind maps in certain situations. Zettelkasten being a source, like just you have all of your sources ever, so you can just go and reference documents or go and look at documents if you ever need them.
I'll make an argument.
The learning itself is more optimized in grind maps, and you are going to get a better learning.
Did you get my point about the last thing I said? So the grind maps being much more specific to something, but like, again, you can kind of do a bunch of topics, but like I think the Zettelkasten kind of doesn't really discriminate, and in that sense, it's its weakness as well. Basically, it's very weak because it doesn't do 8-week courses well. It doesn't do that well because of it.
Yes and no. The thing, Grind Mat.
Can I just get it? I'll have to.
You have to leave?
Yeah, sorry, but yeah, I just have to leave right now, so I just want to.
No problem.
That's fine. You can, if you are interested, you can watch the rest later once I upload it to YouTube.
Yeah.
Okay, no problem. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Anyway, yeah. So yes and no. From you basically said that Grand Maps are more of a school system kind of usage, right? That's basically your argument.
What? I don't get what is school system. I don't know what it is.
Like your class, it's your application for you're in a curriculum, you're learning something is the argument you're trying to make, right?
Okay, so not necessarily curriculum. Like, do you mean a topic or something? I don't know what a school system is.
You have a curriculum, you're learning a topic, and it's very focused onto that, if that makes sense. It doesn't have case that is the argument you were kind of making.
Yeah.
I would say yes and no to that, in the sense that it was made for that, and its primary application is to things like if you're learning some form of new math or learning some form of new medicine topic or some form of new that. But it has applications to anything you were trying to learn, so long as what you were trying to learn is big enough of a thing to require you to go through the depth that you need to do a Grand Map. If you learn something, unless it's a motor or physical skill that doesn't, isn't that kind of information.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I didn't quite get what you meant with the last part. Is that you can kind of go broader? Is that what you meant? I didn't get that. Last part,
if it doesn't need to just be purely academic, you are learning something for a grade thing. Basically,
I'm not saying that. This wasn't my point as well.
Then I may have misunderstood what you were saying.
My point was an example. So I think my point there is that, for example, you're not in an academic context. So there's another example, maybe makes it more clear. You're not an academic, but you just want to learn more about neuroscience. And then you discover, well, neuroscience is too broad of a topic. Probably it is not good for a mind map, so you probably have to make it more specific, and then just go into certain. You then discover maybe it's good to learn about the brain, and then you kind of make those decisions, and then you kind of get to a certain area. I want to learn more about the prefrontal cortex and its functioning. So, that's already specific enough. You decide to make a mind map about that. You're not in a specific academic context. This is something I would do because I want to learn more about neuroscience, and then I would make a mind map.
Yeah, I would say yes and no to that, in the sense that they don't have to be super specific, but I do agree.
No, I'm not saying it's specific. I'm not saying okay to get my point across.
No. What I mean is you don't with the whole neuroscience is such a broad topic, and
we can do neuroscience.
We have to go a bit deeper to find a part of neuroscience that is small enough to do with a mind map.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying in my case, I would kind of think of it in that way because of my specific place I'm starting. It's an example. My point. Again, I'm not getting my point across. I think my point is to say that you pick a topic and then you make a mind map of that. It doesn't matter if it's broad or niche or whatever. You just pick a topic and then you start to understand it, right?
Then what's the point that is trying to be made overall, not just beyond that?
Is that a Zettelkasten doesn't do that. It doesn't necessarily pick a topic. It works with ideas and things that it encounters. It doesn't pick a topic and then to understand it, it just does
Muhammed,
what it does.
Would your point be logically concise to the approaches of top to bottom versus bottom up? I think a Zettelkasten is more bottom up. Well, in that sense, a grind map is more top to bottom.
It has to do with this. And a grind map can never do bottom up, I think, unless you organize it in a very different manner. It'd be very hard to do, I think. But it definitely is more bottom up. This is also for the indexing. In a mind map, it's very hard to kind of compare, to kind of build upon ideas I come across in one piece. Can I do that? How would you go about that? Can you say, Bert? How would you go about like ideas that are, for example, justice in One Piece? If I want to kind of do that, you'd have to mind map. I don't know what way. Like that doesn't make sense.
Well,
So there's certain things it doesn't do
no,
doesn't do well.
No. Oh, let's think about One Piece. Let's think about One Piece.
Let's say, yeah, exactly. Do the One Piece example.
Let's think about One Piece, and then let's think about, for example, a season. I haven't watched One Piece in ages, but let's say, like, think of it as a season. A season is a topic because a season has its own storyline.
Yeah.
You have keywords of characters and events that are going on, and you, to reinforce things, make the mind map to represent the relationships between everything going on within the story. So yes, you could, in theory, make a mind map.
Exactly. I'm not saying you can't, but
yeah,
is it?
I'm just
compared to a dynamic indexing system, which then you can also feed into Zettelkasten if you wanted to. Particularly the indexing system is super. That's what I'm saying. Like apart from the Zettelkasten, an index has a much more rich history than a Zettelkasten, by the way. So I find the index even more interesting here. Is what I'm discovering is that an index is super powerful, and you can kind of cross-reference, build upon. Yeah. For example, if I'm watching a One Piece episode, I'm making annotations. I'm giving the tag Doflamingo, like Doflamingo, whatever. And then I get more ideas about Doflamingo, or let's say Justice and One Piece. I'm tagging things Justice and One Piece as I'm watching it. I don't have to do the effort of going on mind map or whatever. I just have to tag and annotations. And then if I want to work with that material, hopefully automatically it drops into my Obsidian if I have a good integration. I think I do these annotations in my Obsidian. And then I can just do I just have everything I need, and I kind of play around with that basically there, and maybe I make some ideas in my Zettelkasten which I drop, maybe a good idea about Justice, and then I just boom, I have a bunch of things about the theme of Justice in One Piece. With a mind map, it's much, I don't know how I would go about it.
That's actually another interesting distinction that I would make between intellectualism, yes, and learning, because what you're saying is you invest less effort, which in efficient learning terms, that means, you will not retain it in your head as long. It's not optimal learning because the retention is extremely low, probably. But the point of a Zettelkasten usually, or a Zettelkasten-like system, is not to retain it in memory. It is to be able to use it whenever you want, which is highly useful for what I would call intellectualism. But for the purposes of optimal learning, it is almost as bad as just rereading something.
Yeah, for example, the thing about Justice in One Piece, it's not something you want to remember or something, but it's just something you're engaging with as you're watching the anime, basically, and reading the manga, perhaps, if you're doing that. You're engaging with that, and you're noting it down every time you see it. And then it might aggregate those kinds of encounters and the annotations you make based on that. And then you might say, well, let's drop this and let's play around with those notes.
But Muhammad, do you in this way understand the distinction I'm trying to make between intellectualism and learning?
I think what you wanted to say, and it's also, I think that's why what I want to kind of point out with the example of One Piece is that no, you have to say it again, and then I'm not going to make... okay. Say it again.
Okay, so basically the point of intellectualism does not have to be retention. With intellectualism, you don't need to remember information in your head all the time. Whereas with learning, that is essentially the goal. If it's not retained in memory, your learning is poor. So in this example with One Piece, it does serve a very good purpose for what I would call intellectualism, to include it in a Zettelkasten-like system, engage with the thought, etc. But for learning, it would be very bad because you don't retain it in memory, most likely, because you use a tagging system in that sense that takes no effort. Usually, effort means more learning. It depends on what kind of effort, but...
Okay, I disagree. So I kind of disagree, and I kind of agree. Okay, let me say kind of the disagree part is that it does take effort to take intentional indexing entries and make tags.
Okay, but
it does
marginal.
It does take thinking. No, it does take thinking, right, and making good ones. So it does.
Yeah, okay, thinking. I get what you mean.
And then making Zettelkasten notes also takes thinking, giving it a number, giving it a statement, elaborating, linking. It all takes thinking. So that's my disagreement, and I kind of agree with the rest. Again, I'm not sure about the learning versus intellectualism. We already talked about this. I'm not going to get, but that's what I'm thinking. So
it doesn't necessarily take the kind of thinking that produces effective learning, but I do agree that it does require thinking to be able to do it.
Why isn't it effective learning? If I want to learn about justice in One Piece, why isn't it effective learning? Would making mind map be effective? It'd be kind of ridiculous, in my opinion, to say that if you were to make a mind map of that, it would be effective, and a grinding mapping, I mean, for me, that kind of stretches too far. But that's my opinion.
If you think about it the right way, you could, if you thought about it using proper higher order thinking and learning, you could theoretically get those benefits from Zettelkasten as well. But the problem is, if you were just thinking in terms of what you just described, you could get benefits, but it's not necessarily going to be as effective, whereas the point of grind mapping forces it to be effective.
Okay, can I bring up it's an interesting point? I think I like the point you made there, which I probably would agree again. Yeah, but what if I were to organize my systems in a way, not only my Zettelkasten. I think Zettelkasten is a very specific part, but let's say the kind of idea, note taking, whatever learning thing. But I want to organize my reading, my Zettelkasten, my indexing system. Even my writing, it's kind of related to that. I think writing is a important component. Even maybe speaking and teaching. Those are kind of writing, speaking, and teaching are kind of ideally you'd have those at the end. You park those at the end so you can kind of get it out, basically, those ideas and things. But if I were to organize it in a way that it would, stimulate higher order learning. By the way, the question is, how do I organize that so to make sure that it does do that? Sometimes it might not even be necessarily the objective, so it might not even be necessary. But if I were to do that more intentionally, and the question then is how do you do that? That's something to discover. I have no clue, by the way. I'm making. But if I were to organize it in that way, would that kind of be a good way out?
So learn about Bloom's taxonomy, or preferably, because I'm getting more interested in, and it seems to be more interesting in the thing I just posted in the Discord, is making an argument that solo taxonomy is better than Bloom's for multiple reasons, then by that logic using solos, and understanding that sort of thinking system to be able to think about the information in a way that, for example, when you're making a mind map, you're thinking about everything, you're trying to work out and establish relationships in a way that's simple, and just some keywords and just some key arrows and a little doodle, in a way that represents the information that if you were to relook at that mind map, you could reconstruct the information just based upon what you were looking at. So take that, the purpose is to not have to look at the mind map, but you get the point. Take that thinking process where you were thinking about the most important relationships, the most important. You're following said Bloom's taxonomy of higher order thinking and all that kind of thing. You could theoretically get Zettelkasten up to a point where it is pretty decent for learning if you were approaching it from the learning perspective. While doing that, you could also still use it for other things. But if you were to look at it from that lens while trying to do something, you could theoretically get learning benefits.
I do have another question, by the way. This is related to expanding my thoughts on my distinctions. Would you say, Bert, that generally speaking, or maybe in all cases, the objective of learning is to retain information, to remember it?
Yeah.
Then
that's kind of the use case.
Yeah. So in that sense, how can intellectualism be a direct application of learning if certain activities of intellectualism do not require you to remember, but instead just engage deeply with the material and think, regardless of whether or not you remember it, because they don't have the same purpose?
Can I give another? Is learning also not understanding? I'm just mixing it up here, because I don't understand learning as well as you guys. So is understanding not another good way to think about learning? other than retaining information?
Well, that kind of is the goal, but yeah, it's just look. You want to be able to not just recognize or recall information, but you want to be able to take it and just reconstruct it and be able to remember it in a way that it's just in your head, pretty much. That's the goal of learning. And I agree with.
For me, that's like an understanding, kind of. I would phrase that what you just said, like as understanding-ish kind of thing. I don't know.
With what Mr. Hoorn just said is yeah, I agree with that. That is a good point. I still don't agree that intellectualism transcends learning.
No, because by the same... I agree, because by the same logic... I did not think of this earlier, but by the same logic, if they don't have the same purposes, then it also cannot include learning. Maybe it depends on learning in some parts, but it does not always depend on learning in that sense then. Yeah, I definitely need to think more about it, but I know they are different. The question is in what way they are different, and that is what I'm trying to discover and do research about. But I think that this last part we talked about has been useful to clarify some of my thoughts. So I'll definitely rewatch this part of the video later on and make my hypothesis notes about that.
Yeah, so...
Intellectualism uses learning instead of as a direct application, is what we've distinguished just then.
Mm-hmm.
That yeah, I can agree with that.
Yeah. What does like a Nietzsche, like what did he do, for example? Like
Nietzsche?
If you think about like, yeah, I'm just kind of giving an example of like is that like an intellectual in your point of view?
I don't know him very well, but I think he would be an intellectual, yeah.
Friedrich Nietzsche.
Yeah,
I
know who he is, but I mean, I don't know enough about his methods, etc. But I think he would be an intellectual. Yeah,
he definitely is. Like, he's the most intellectual you can kind of name, I think. But like him, right? Like, if you look at his life, like what he did, basically. I mean, did he also not want to understand? If we give the definition of like retaining information or understanding.
Like, but retaining information, like understanding is different from remembering, because understanding is more like comprehension. It is being able to talk about something when you. Understanding something can also depend on notes if you cannot remember it. Remembering is literally retaining it in your head.
But if you do higher order learning, isn't comprehension and understanding on the pinnacle, or am I making a wrong call here?
Well, on higher order learning, as far as I am aware, it is analyzing and evaluation, so increasing comprehension in that sense. But in the terms of efficient learning, it's still as goal to have that deeper understanding retained in your memory. If it is not retained in your memory, it does not matter how well you understand it in terms of learning.
In Bloom's specifically, the lowest order is to be able to remember something. Then you have to be able to then right above that, but still in the lower orders is to understand it. Yes. And then above that is to be able to apply it.
Which I always found out of place, because all the all the stages are theoretical except for application, but that's another point.
No, you can understand something by doing something, right?
They all build upon one another. Yeah. To be able to understand, you have to be able to remember. To be able to remember it in the way we're talking about. To be able to apply, you have to be able to understand. To be able to analyze, I think, comes after apply. Yeah. You have to be able to apply, and then evaluate comes after analyze. So, and to be able to evaluate, you have to be able to analyze, and then to be able to create, you have to be able to evaluate. They all build upon one another.
I don't necessarily agree with that, but okay.
Well, okay. It's the point they try to make in Bloom's taxonomy.
Mm-hmm.
You should read the thing I sent. It's interesting. It compares and talks about how Bloom's taxonomy is more about how places make their tests and all that kind of stuff, whereas solos is more of a more the science.
Yeah, the cognitive processes. Yeah.
So
But yeah, should we go back to the point?
sorry. Yeah, learning's a lot of things, and it's very, very interesting. It's way more complicated than what you learn when you're a kid. And it's very There's so many different ways to look at it.
Yeah, and I would say, but isn't understanding and comprehension like a very important like if you want to learn something deeply, comprehension and understanding is like an important thing, right?
It is essential. I do not disagree that it is essential, but ultimately when you look at the scientific literature, mostly the neuroscientific way, if it is not retained in memory, you have not learned it according to most definitions of learning in the scientific literature.
You can still retain something, but like if you retain it, but then another question is asked you. You have retained some information, but if you cannot reconstruct it in a different way and refashion the information, you have not properly understood it. Probably, right?
Let's try to think about this in this way. So, when looking through the lens of learning, the lowest level of Bloom's taxonomy. Retention, remembering. You have to be able to remember to be able to do everything else above it. You have to be able to retain information to be able to do the next step, which is to understand it. You have to be able to comprehend and understand the information, which is the second level, which is an important part. But everything above it requires it. But it is not the biggest thing. Like, just because you understand what something means doesn't mean you know how to apply what that means next level. Just because you know how to apply something doesn't mean you know how to analyze everything to do with it. And Bloom's taxonomy is a bit flawed, but comprehension is important. But when it comes to learning, comprehension can't happen without retention. And in like the you've learned it sense, you can comprehend something without retaining it, but that's different.
Let me.
Okay.
1 second.
I
want to take a literal quote I have somewhere in my Zettelkasten.
Yeah. The problem is this. He's sifting through his slipbooks.
Yeah, I have. I have to know this. I knew it was quite earlier, but like in the book Science of Memory Concepts, which is written by Rudiger and a bunch of other scientists, there is this quote which is a definition of learning, which says use-dependent structural change at the cellular level in the nervous system, which is necessary and possibly also sufficient to induce long-lasting functional changes that are usually beneficial for the organism. So that is how they define learning. But that means
which is
retention.
Kind of what I was arguing to real time, kind of.
Yeah, it's neuroplasticity, I know, but it depends on the retention. If it is not retained, it has not been learned. That is what I'm trying to say.
But that's what Bird is want to say. Like the retention of information is like the first layer of Bloom's taxonomy. But it's required, and they build on each other.
Yeah, I know, but the goal of learning in that sense must be retention. Because if it is not retained, but if it is not, that's what I'm trying to argue. Because if you cannot retain it, it has not been learned. So the goal must be retention.
Okay, but like if you have retained it, but if you cannot explain it,
so it's
you can't
I know.
and comprehend it. But if you can't,
I know. But so in that sense, it's retention at multiple levels. You know,
I wouldn't say it's the overall goal, but it's part of the goal.
It's part of the goal, yeah. I would say
the goal is a lot more nuanced than that. Yeah. But I do agree with like kind of what you were saying.
And that's why your point of comparing, in my opinion, intellectualism with learning kind of falls flat because of that. Because I think you're getting, in my opinion, what I'm hearing, and also hearing Bert and I'm illiterate in learning science, so I have no clue. But if I'm just like from a bystander,
Yeah.
your distinction between the goal of learning being retention, I think that is just not true. From what I again also what Bert says, and that's why the comparison between intellectualism.
Yeah,
and
I know, but you're not understanding. Like, Bert, what I'm trying to say in this sense is, let's say you can understand something on a very deep level, but only by looking at the notes you have, but you cannot retain it. Have you learned it, even though you understand it on a deep level?
Yeah, that's why I said like it's not the overall goal. It's a huge component. You have to be able to retain something to be able to learn it. I definitely agree with that, but it's not the overall goal in the sense that like when learning, you don't want to just be able to recall what something is.
So in a Zettelkasten, if you so let's try to relate it to Zettelkasten then. If in a Zettelkasten you are thinking very deeply on a topic and you are engaging in very like good deep thought processes and you are like being philosophical, for example, but you still cannot retain the information, have you been busy with learning or with something else?
That's interesting, but I want to make an argument that like when doing that, what benefit do you get if you're not learning specifically and don't retain it? Do you use that and write something?
For writing, for example, because that's the question. That's exactly the example that Muhammed was making earlier about One Piece. It is not something he wants to retain in his information.
Yeah,
but it is something he wants to be engaging with.
But the probability is high I will retain it anyways.
Yeah, but it's not the goal.
But it's a high probability that it will happen anyways. I will retain the information. But that's not the goal exactly. But it does. There is a high probability it will be the case. Yeah.
Do you kind of get what I'm trying to say, Bert?
No, I get what you're saying, and that like intellectualism, I agree that it's different. I just don't agree that it transcends.
Yeah, okay.
I agree that there's a distinction, and I agree that like intellectualism has a requirement of learning because not everything in intellectualism needs learning, but learning and intellectualism overlap, and a lot of intellectualism involves needing learning and all that kind of thing. I agree with all those points. I just don't agree that intellectualism surrounds learning and is just like the higher life form of learning.
Yeah, no, I agree with that.
I agree with that.
I agree with what you're trying to say because that is what I came up with earlier in the when we were talking because by the same logic. Yeah.
Now that you've come up with that, I agree with you. I just didn't agree with that it is all encompassing and is superior to. Different.
I understand.
And then transcending.
Yeah,
kind of step back on the transcending part as well.
That's where I got stuck. I agree with you now. Just that.
Do you step back on the transcending part?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then I agree with you. We're good.
Yeah, we're good. Oh, I did a thumbs up and it responded, and it also did a thumbs up again. Oh, I didn't do it right now. Fuck. Well, I can say that on YouTube. Yeah, so I don't know. Should we close it? Do you have to talk the shit, Tom?
Yeah, sure. I think this is the longest session right now because we're at 2.5 hours.
Yeah, but we're not really talking about the book. But one more thing, I'd be interested. I'm probably gonna do iCanStudy, but I'm also building my own kinds of systems. I'm really into love of my index, and the way I'm understanding that right now is Zettelkasten and other things. Again, Zettelkasten is just a thing, not everything. But I'm interested in the question of like when it comes to higher order learning, how we could maybe the question if it's present in my systems already. I think if I understand iCanStudy more deeply and the systems they present, I'm gonna do the grind mapping. I can then review my systems I'm using currently at the backdrop of those systems. So I'm kind of interested in that. Maybe we can kind of further this discussion over the months to come, as I'm also engaging in that.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah,
I think you can also do that because, like, learning and stuff, and what iCanStudy teaches is what Dr. Justin Sung also says. It's mostly about the cognitive processes, what goes on in the mind. So, grind mapping is just a tool in that sense, a medium that indeed forces or highly stimulates those kind of correct processes. So once you become proficient at it, you can also apply it in a Zettelkasten, is what I think.
I would just like to argue, well, agree and argue that I think that once you get to being like that, you can, in a Zettelkasten, upgrade it in a sense for learning specifically, that you can learn and retain more. I wouldn't say that by getting to that point it is equal to a grind map, primarily because a grind map is still intentionally made for that purpose, and it's got a whole bunch of different things like illustrations and all that kind of thing that follow specific rules and stuff.
Exactly.
I would say that it could get to, like, in the amount you learn, it could get to like 60-70% of what a grind map could give you, which is still like good enough.
Yeah, and the other thing I want to say is that do you constantly engage with the mind maps you have made in the past and reference it and constantly engage and add on top of it and constantly refine and add and link from the mind maps in the past?
As your understanding of the information grows and the topic you're learning grows, you kind of build upon it in your memory. But
in your exactly.
Yeah, you do recall. You do your recall and you make and your retrieval and you make another mind map in a different way, or you do a different kind, or you do a different kind of
mind map,
retrieval, or do a different kind of retrieval.
But it's probably pretty rare to visit an old mind map.
That's an important distinction between, let's say, mind mapping, a la Justin Sung particularly, and using an indexing system / Zettelkasten. That's a big difference, because the index and the Zettelkasten, I'm using index and Zettelkasten alternatively because I think the index on its own stands and does its own thing. The index for me is not part of the Zettelkasten. It's part of the Zettelkasten, but I use the index for everything. Much more knowledge. It's much more important. It's starting to be much more important for me. Again, the index also has a long history. You can look into that if you want. But for me, you constantly engage and on top of it. It's something that you don't start a new index. You just have the index that grows and grows and metastasizes basically, and constantly and also swells. And Zettelkasten does the same thing, kind of thing. So that's an important distinction.
Describe it.
What uses
uses something that I only hear when people talk about cancer.
Yeah, I know, but like sometimes it's used in the context of something growing and swelling.
Yeah, I know.
As a contagion, really basically.
No, I agree. I know what the word means. It's just outside of that sort of context. One thing though is I actually think that, if you think about it, is a bit of a strength of grind maps in the sense that they're easier to do interleaved retrieval with compared to your notes in a Zettelkasten.
Why?
Because in a Zettelkasten everything is in there, not necessarily permanently, but if it's in there permanently and you're doing retrieval on it, it's not as... Grind maps are made for where it's just a bit different. You can do retrieval with the information, but the thing is, like, a Zettelkasten is more made for looking back at the information to need to.
But there's an embedded kind of I'm not sure if that's interleaving, but particularly retrieval practice,
maintenance rehearsal.
That kind of thing, because the thing, Zettelkasten is a back and forth process where you're constantly encountering things and ideas, and then I'm also going to use the index as well here, but you're constantly going back and forth, and then you're going back to other ideas, so you're constantly rehearsing and then constantly going back and forth. And it's constantly
it's basically playful rote learning.
About that is it's like rote learning / cued recall at best. I agree that it's still got something. It's just like it's not
rote learning. What's rote learning?
Okay, so
rote learning is by repetition, basically.
By repetition in an effective way.
but it's not rote learning in the sense that you're kind of looking at it. I wouldn't agree with that same. I don't even know what rote learning is, but like the way you described it, that's not what a Zettelkasten does. You're not like the thing is the node lives in your head, so you're not rote learning. You're not going back to the node to learn about the node. You're just linking the nodes. It has nothing to do with kind of.
Yeah, I mean, I speak on terms with Bert, but it does include like an element of maintenance rehearsal where you visit old nodes because you are looking for another node specifically in the analog method. But in that sense, it does include rote
It's
learning. But
digital
it also goes beyond beyond that. It's not just rote learning, but it is an element of it. And I would say that in general, rote learning is ineffective for memorization for most types of information, but in a Zettelkasten, because you are also engaging with the material in different methods, and in my case, and probably also Muhammad's, we use our material also for writing, which I usually do for memory, and in arguments. So we do have interleaved retrieval in that sense. Utilizing a Zettelkasten along with our other activities does increase the learning over what the general people do. I would agree it's not as efficient as iCanStudy, but it does bring benefits that in most of my scenarios are more than adequate.
Look, like I said, I said better, not that Zettelkasten doesn't have it. Mm-hmm. Zettelkasten's retrieval is pretty queued.
Yeah, that's
in the sense that it's queued retrieval. It just isn't as effective as how grind maps are made for and can be used for free retrieval, free recall, and you're not using.
There is an argument to be made, by the way. There is an argument.
I kind of. Yeah.
I want to say that that I made this point like a year ago or something in iCanStudy. Just an interesting food for thought. There is no true free recall. Why? Because the moment you put something on the paper and it is in front of you, it becomes queued recall because of all the connections you have.
The difference is you are approaching it. The difference is in the way you are approaching it in your mind.
Yeah, I get what you mean.
I get what you're saying.
Yeah, it's mostly just for fun, but I agree with the difference between the methods.
It's a difference in thought. Thing? Okay, we should probably also close it up. I'm just going to give one example. I'm like very interested in like I'm reading this book about irrationality in ancient Greece. It's called Divine Mania: All Traces of Conscience in Ancient Greece.
Oh yeah, you showed that book a while ago, right?
Yeah. So I read something there about like enthusiasm, and I just read that. I annotated it. I gave it good tags, index, and that's everything I did related to it. Okay, I didn't really do much at all, but it got very embedded well because I could really relate it to other things. I was already, and then I made really good annotations and so forth. I didn't even put it in my Zettelkasten. Okay, but then someone came up, and then I, out of nowhere, I spit it the definition. I'm just going to do it for you. So I said this to this person, that the definition of enthusiasm is like as a god has entered you. And so in ancient Greece, they would kind of think about it as like Dionysus would enter you. They would call it Bacchoi or Bacchae. If Apollo could also enter you as a deity, it would be called... I did forget it. This one I did forget, but it's a pretty complex term. And nymphs could also enter you, which is called being nympholeptos. I think Apollo, I almost got it right, but like, yeah. So I could recall these things very simply, very, very fast. Like just
I have the same thing. Like when I read,
like
when I read my own books, I always connect it automatically in my mind to stuff I already have in the Zettelkasten and write it down on the bibliography note. But I agree that is mostly like queued encoding, queued recall. I don't know what to call it, but it does help definitely.
Yeah, but
it's relational thought.
In my opinion, you have linear nodes, which is just like trash, and then you have Zettelkasten, which is good and good for specific. I'll get to that. Good for specific purposes and can be used for learning, but then above Zettelkasten for its specific purpose, grind maps for learning specifically is better.
Yeah.
I agree, and hence why I'm trying to set up a Zettelkasten, is that a Zettelkasten can be used for learning and has additional applications beyond. So I'm not arguing against Zettelkasten at all. I'm just arguing that there's a bit of a distinction that if you want to have optimal learning, you should probably use grind maps as well.
Yeah.
I mean, linear notes, Muhammad, is basically when you take a piece of paper and then you just write it all out in a massive block of text. It's the least effective way, and you tend to not end up remembering it.
But that's kind of a strategy that many people use, like in university banks. It's like having a laptop and then just click.
Why do you think their learning is so bad?
Hence why learning tends to not be very effective, and hence why.
Can I give food for thought? Isn't iCanStudy very mind map centric in the sense that, and they also they focus on digital tooling, like infinite canvases, and isn't that just very? It's a new technology, and using that technology, it kind of, again, we have like thousands of years of human history, and learning has been there, of course. But you then say that learning has always been ineffective. Like what's
actually an interesting question.
What's going on there? It's like
learning has never been optimized.
I kind of would disagree with that hard, but like, okay, just to hear you out, man. But like,
well, if you think about it, like us now, like our brains have no real distinction from people a very long time ago, long before we had a level of civilization. They weren't exactly learning anything like math or science, so they didn't exactly have an optimized learning system.
That's kind of weird because it wasn't there, so it wasn't present.
Yes, but the brain could still do it, and they could still have use. They still had uses of learning. They learned how to hunt.
I think, in my opinion, I think you're making a jump because you're taking the environment out of the occasion.
I'm making an extreme.
But I think the point you're making, I get probably what you're meaning. And this is, I think, where cognitive psychology is kind of weird, maybe. Again, this is also what Danny Hatcher would say as an ecological dynamic psychologist.
I'll make a better point. I'll make a better point. In the vast majority of schools, if you take a photo of a school from 100 years ago...
Oh yeah, I know that.
It doesn't look all that different from a classroom from today.
Yeah, that's true.
And a classroom from 100 years ago wasn't made to educate people; it was made to make people into factory workers.
Yeah.
But I'm not specifically talking about the classroom context. I'm talking about society in general. So it doesn't need to be only.
That speaks to the education system in general, because if they have an optimized environment, they also have a necessarily optimized system.
Is an environment for learning, right? Learning is an environment. Okay. Oh, sorry. Schools are an environment for learning, but learning is something that happens beyond any context. It's just a human process, right? So I'm talking about society at large, and I'm talking. My critique basically was about like again, I can study being mind map centric, and basically the infinite canvases and mind mapping. So my thing is like, okay, if this technology is just recent, like have we always been ineffective? And I would disagree with that, because I think it's like a very blatant, weird statement to make. That
well, not always being ineffective, just is better now. Riding on a horse wasn't necessarily ineffective, but I would still rather get in a car.
Yeah, but that's different. Again, you're comparing technology with human processing, and I think that's not the same.
Well, you're making a point about the fancy technology and the mind maps.
Yes.
The mind maps are a way to force the thinking.
But yeah, exactly.
And they're based upon our research. We didn't know that's how the brain learns. We now know that. We couldn't have fully optimized for it without knowing that that's how the brain works, which is a bit important point.
And this is my other critique, is basically the mind map centric approach, which states that, like, probably what you said is like that it forces you to think more and whatever and retain more. But again, I'm not into the learning science, but I might even challenge that, and then making the statement that recently in 10 or 20 years, that because we have this new tooling, we're suddenly much better at learning. And probably, again, there's probably many approaches to learning, and technology certainly. I love technology. I work at a company called Digital Fitness, and we're all about technology. I love it. But this kind of statements, I don't know.
I don't think
it
it's
kind of sounds
only,
weird to me.
I don't think it's the only way to do it. I think it's for the application of learning. It's the best. It's one of the best ways to do it.
But it's just recent because infinite canvases again, and I think Justin just really emphasizes on you can do. Maps. Yeah, okay, that's fine, but that's different mind mapping, right? Then
mind maps evolved from concept maps a bit.
Exactly. So there's a big history. But like I think when it comes to the technology that's recent, and I think Justin Sung puts emphasis on like infinite canvases, and then the paper is limited and wouldn't help you that much. Wouldn't be as effective, which maybe probably is true. I'm not against that.
That's just because of like Zoom and being able to put more information means you have more space to learn.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a pretty good tool. I also use the infinite canvases, so I like that a lot. But like, I think we should definitely wrap it up because I'm also pretty tired. But like, I think this point of like again, I think that there is overemphasis probably on like mind mapping or whatever. And that there maybe is more to it than just that, and that the mind mapping tooling has been pretty recent.
Again, like mind mapping is just forcing the correct thinking that is now that is based upon what we now know about how the human brain learns.
Yeah,
there would be another way to do it. It's just that because mind maps are built for it, it's the best application of it currently.
So would you say that Richard Feynman was an inefficient learner because he didn't use a mind mapping tool, which he had infinite canvas scroll?
He used. I would say that Richard Feynman could have learned what he learned faster. Not that he was an inefficient learner because he thought the right way.
So I think that's a bold statement, and I would say it's probably untrue. But like, again, it's the other medium.
Well, he admitted himself. I have his biography. He admitted himself that he could have learned better.
Yeah, of course. But like, okay, I get what you mean. But do you think that the infinite canvas scroll tooling, iCanStudy, you would the iCanStudy course and then learn better? Okay, I'm kind of criticizing Justin too much. But like, I think
the thing about Richard Feynman is he already had what iCanStudy is teaching, which is deep processing, and the main benefit he would get is from an established learning system, because from my understanding, he didn't use space repetitional retrieval practice to the same extent as what we can now. He used like the Feynman technique, hence it's named after him. But he used retrieval and all that. But now that we understand how the brain learns, and someone of his intellectual caliber, he could have achieved a pretty significant amount if his once in a blue moon brain had the learning systems we have now. You can't argue that, because it's like, why? For example,
that's your goal, right? That's your goal, right? To create a society where genius is the norm. And you muted yourself. I think.
What is the norm? What is its purpose? I'm just.
Yeah, I think Bert. I think someone came in or something.
Like, what did you say about the purpose? We should probably end this, by the way.
Yeah, I said that his purpose would be to create. I thought his purpose was to what he wanted to do is to create a society where genius is not once in a lifetime or like once in a X years, but like where it is more so the norm.
Interesting.
Which with the whole teaching correct deep processing from the iCanStudy and stuff, it can be. But the point I was making is that, like, with him already having that, if he then took the learning systems that we have now to then optimize his learning to use spaced repetition, interleaving proper retrieval practice, he probably could have learnt more. That's not to say he was an inefficient learner, just that he didn't have the tools we have now. You can't say that we don't have an advantage over our predecessors in the sense that we have more of an understanding and we have more things.
We have many disadvantages, my friends.
If you took
like we have instant porn to our access, but that's another point.
If you take Socrates, for example, who is potentially a genius, we don't know him properly to be able to say that. We could assume that. Yeah, we can assume. If you take Socrates and then took Socrates, same dude, but he was born in our century, he could probably have achieved more.
Mm-hmm.
But the same thing. But the funny thing is that there's actually for example, I think Plato criticized when writing first came to be. He criticized writing.
Yeah, I remember
because he said it helped him, or like it is writing, is a tool for forgetting, or that the mind would kind of corrupt and then would forget a lot of stuff, basically, which is not a good thing. And you might say, oh, well, writing is good. Writing has been one of the most transformational things. But like you have to there are like pros and cons of technology. I like technology. I think tech can help like obsidian as application. Yeah.
That's interesting because that argument isn't wrong.
Yeah, that's the thing. Plato said it back then.
It's cognitive.
Plato's argument wasn't wrong in the sense that if you learn something and then you immediately offload it onto paper in a linear way and don't retrieve it, don't do anything with it, you're not going to learn as much. That argument wasn't wrong. But they didn't know that's how the brain learns, especially to the extent we do now, to then be able to achieve what they could if they were in our generation with our understanding.
Mm-hmm.
They're inefficient for our days, but they aren't inefficient for what they had.
The other point I want to bring up is that I think the environment, probably when it comes to learning, is super important. And so to bound the environment to this day and age only to the technological opportunities we have, I think is a very bad take to make. Definitely when it comes to centuries, thousands of years of human history.
You should explain that because
just bound it.
You should explain what the environment means in this sense, because I know that Danny Hatcher is about ecological learning, but I know very little about that, so I just can't go into
Danny Hatcher. Maybe we should just invite Danny Hatcher, and I think we should finish it up right now. But that's just a point.
Not right now. No.
On it. Yeah, we should not right now. But we should invite Danny Hatcher and maybe talk about this because the discussion was about learning with the new technological tooling we have and the understanding of brain science and learning we have currently, and maybe then the people Plato and importing them into let's say have a teleport for Socrates and Feynman and getting them here and then learning the new systems. Okay, we're done.
Muhammad, you're asking questions from your perspective, so I'll ask a question from mine.
Yeah, fine.
Will you argue that writing on a wax tablet was better than writing on a piece of paper? Are you willing to argue that point? So, because that is kind of the point you are arguing. It is an utilization of a tool. It is still the same thing as writing as it would be on a piece of paper, but the difference is it is a completely manipulative, you can just manipulate it in any way to then have the
Papyrus was one of the best inventions.
Being able to move it and zoom in and having infinite canvas. That it's still just writing as it would be on a piece of paper, but with the benefits of an infinite canvas. It's the same thing with a beneficial infinite canvas.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So to kind of answer, do I think about the tablet and kind of writing things? Of course, it's more inefficient than writing on paper on let's say papyrus, because it's more adjacent to the development. And of course, it's harder to do that way. But when we're talking about learning, it happens in your head and not in the medium. Of course, it can help you and aid you, probably, right? Technology does. And certain technologies probably help more or whatever. But
it's easier to...
Yes. Yeah.
It's easier to, on an infinite canvas, you can circle something to take what you've written and manipulate it to re-represent the chunks in ways that you want it to look like in like 3D space. You can have 1 point words and move them around to represent chunks. For a piece of paper, you can't do that to the same extent.
But the other thing,
yes,
the other
it's about
way,
the thinking, but it allows for the thinking to be more streamlined, which means you are going to be more optimal and more efficient.
Yeah, but again, when we're talking about the environment, like when you, for example, take again those stone tablet guys, people that were, they didn't have all these complex topics like algebra, whatever, and all that stuff. So their learning was again bound to the environment, and so the way the technology developed, again, they didn't have a need to have the technology to kind of learn about these things because it wasn't present.
So what you're saying, basically, Muhammad, is that you want to calculate efficiency or measure efficiency not only based on how the brain works, but also based on what the environment gives as capability.
Probably, and also the context of the time, because if you say well, from now we have like all these different topics, dude, they didn't have all those topics. And this is like a very anachronistic perspective to take, again, from the Infinite Canvas School. I'm a partly historian, this is why I'm saying an anachronism. To say like, well, yeah, but they didn't have that, it wasn't efficient for learning. Well, their environment, their context didn't have all those complex civilization built up. The tooling is just present right now because civilization was grown. So to make the argument it wasn't as effective, I think
it's basically it's basically the same argument as that. What I usually say is that people say that, for example, people in the medieval ages were just evil. Well, that's a bad argument because you shouldn't compare medieval people to the moral virtues and ethics that we have today. You should compare it to what was common sense in that time period.
That is a very general kind of introduction when it comes to historical thinking, is this example you're giving. But this is like another example, and it's more about technology and media.
Yeah, but the argument is kind of the same. Yeah. That's what I'm trying to...
Yeah, exactly. So I think you're on the right path.
I think I get what you were trying to say. It's just like, to say that, for example, what's another historical figure? Let's say Dirac. To say, for example, physicist Feynman's mentor, not mentor, but idol, kind of like how Feynman's my idol physicist guy.
Let's say him. I don't know who he is, but
it's just a random historical dude. He was a genius. Say him, random dude. You cannot say that he had the knowledge we have about learning now, and if he did not have the knowledge, and to say that he did not have the knowledge we have about learning now, is also to say that he didn't learn as effectively as we can now, because we have never fully used the potential of the brain. It's such an elaborate thing. It's one of the most elaborate things in the universe. We just have not utilized it to its full potential. But we won't end up utilizing the maximum optimal usage of our brain compared to people in 100 years. It's just fact. But I get what you're saying. It's just like it's just innovation. Everything improves.
But but again, that you could also kind of argue against that. For example, when it comes to and this is a different topic, but just to take your last part, what you said, the first part, I think that's yes, that's totally yes. But the last part, when it comes to innovation, there's improvement. That's not always the case, because when it comes to workers' productivity, let's say, productivity. We assume that we'd be more productive as knowledge workers, or the people that not do physical labor, but do other labor using their brain, basically. It could be anything. We assume that they'd be more productive, but that wasn't the case. Actually, productivity of those kinds of people declined. So innovation, technological innovation, people, there was this kind of, if you also are into Carl Newport, he also talks about these topics, and many others like him. They kind of said it'd be better with using a bunch of technology and internet, and we have more information, it'd be all better, but that is just didn't happen.
Well, I mean, we have it improved in the sense that we have access to the information. It's just
but
the people didn't use it.
But how do you do that? How do you do that? Right, that's a hard question.
You take Google and you Google what you want to know.
No, but it's different. That's not how you use information, in my opinion. That's
not using the information. Sorry, I mean using the tools. But yeah, I know.
I kind of get what you mean. But like, you can have like access to infinite amount of information. But I think you, as a learning background, would say like, okay, how do you use that information and apply it and use it in your work and so on and whatever.
I agree with you.
Very different, right?
I agree. I agree with you. I probably should have chosen a different wording for what I said, but what I mean is just like when it comes to that sort of thing, it's just improvement. I cannot.
And decline sometimes. Sometimes your memory declines. You forget things with writing and with navigation. Technology doesn't always improve things. When it comes to GPS, people are less good at spatially navigating the area. They have a less good spatial memory of everything. And that is just a fact as well. And that's a decline, not an improvement. Right? Would you agree? Yes or no?
It's a decline in our ability, but it's an improvement in the sense that we always have the ability to find something. It's a decline if you don't have access to it.
There's an improvement and a decline at the same, and that's what I'm saying. There's both. Yeah. I'm not saying it's only one.
I agree with what you were saying. I probably should have chosen a more careful wording. But
no problem. Yeah, and
just like
this is the
It just is improvement though. When it comes to learning, I cannot willingly and just like happily say that someone from 100 years ago, it's possible but incredibly unlikely that they were thinking and learning in an optimal, like, efficient way.
I think there were like many people. Like many people were like probably very effective learners, and that there was like infrastructure to actually support that. I think that was probably the case, and has been always the case.
For what they had then is what I agree with that in the sense that like for what they had then they were optimal. But if you were to take them and to like think in the sense of what we know about learning, they probably weren't as optimal as we could be, and by that argument, we won't be as optimal as someone in 100 years could be. I agree with what you're saying in the sense that, like, they had an efficient learning system, but they weren't as efficient as they could be.
Yeah, but like,
there's more potential. It's a possibility, but it's just like I think it's unlikely.
Yeah, but I think we're just gonna close it off. My final thoughts is that like, I think this last debate was very interesting, but like, I think that you bounce
something it on YouTube and then make hypothesis notes later.
Yeah. So I think we should close it right now. But I think the last thing to say about that is like, I think to bounce something to just one tiny period in life, like in a world. I think in the world like the technological period we have currently with digital agents and stuff like that, and to say that learning is better because of that and whatever, I think that's something I wouldn't agree with. Again, I've also
that was more about science. That was more about the science of we understand how the brain learns better, which means we can utilize what we know about how the brain learns.
Yeah, but that's
because it's just kind of
the thing is that you could say that same for the workers' productivity, but it hasn't happened. And you could say that like you could. I'm going to give an extreme example. You could say we know more about enlightenment and enlightenment because the spiritual enlightenment, because we have kind of did research on like monks, and we kind of looked at their brain when they were like meditating, and this gives us more, and we should be more enlightened people. That's just not, again, that's an extreme example. So that's kind of maybe I'm strong-manning you a bit, like
knowing kind of and taking advantage of aren't the same thing though. We know more about learning science, yes, and if we did not take advantage of what we know about the learning science, yes, we would learn at the same we would have the same capability of learning as someone from 100 years ago. But if we took advantage of it, we would be better.
Is it learning science? Is it learning science explaining something that ensues when we're learning? And so that learning process is something that has happened for thousands of years, and it's trying to explain that process how it ensues, right? And so to say that like, well, that because we know more we can learn better. No, it's trying to explain the process, and there were many effective learners probably in the past, and as effective as any other learner currently. There's not any.
But that's only one component about learning. There's a lot to do with learning that's just so much more than that.
I think a Socrates, a Nietzsche, take whatever person you want, like all of those big names, put them in this day and age, they're as effective as any other person. There's no more effective learner. It doesn't really matter, in my opinion. But we're using tooling like that to help us, of course. But I don't think it's like better or whatever. Like, what do you mean? Like, it's for me that sounds very weird.
Well, they didn't know how to.
Yeah, we should close this off and maybe talk about it a bit later.
Yeah, the last point, you can say last thing, and then I'm not going to respond, and we'll just say, okay.
They didn't know how to take advantage of interleaving and retrieval practice and spaced repetition and all that kind of thing the way we know how to. Yes, that's one.
They were doing it.
Yeah, but
right?
they didn't know how to respond of it the way we can. The way we know how to, they didn't know, or they weren't doing.
Okay.
I agree. I agree with the whole certain parts, but it's just like, probably not.
On your final thoughts, what did you think about this debate we had? What was your stance? Where do you stand? And then we'll just close it up, and we're not going to say anything anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I find it interesting. I know too little, and I'm kind of tired, so my mind could not really focus on the topic at hand really much.
You're tired. It's 6 a.m. for me.
Yeah, it's like 8 p.m. here, but we have spoken. Like Muhammad and I were here for 3
hours. I'm not tired. I'm energized. I'm like.
Yeah, okay, but I mean, I'm tired of the like exhausted in that sense of the intellectual stuff.
I agree.
But I mean, I think. I'm not going really into it because to state my opinion would take too much time. So I think we'll
just say where do you stand? Where do you think you stand more? I'm interested, and you can say both. It doesn't matter. Like you can say whatever, and just you don't have to elaborate, and we'll just close it. I'm just interested.
I think I generally agree that we can learn more efficiently right now, and I also think that if like intellectual people from the past or great learners from the past would reappear in modern day, that they would potentially be able to learn more depending on if they take advantage of it and decide to go into it. I mean that's just a given. It's hard to argue against that in a logical way, actually. And what I don't know what I think about being able to compare the efficiency or measure efficiency based on environmental conditions and cultural/time conditions. I don't know what I think about that. I mean, in the case of morals, ethics, virtues, etc., it makes logical sense to me to compare it against a time period. But for efficiency in learning, which is more of an objective thing, I don't think that makes sense, because learning is by nature learning by nature is objective, but ethics and morals and virtues by nature are mostly subjective. I mean, if you're religious, it's objective in the sense you compare it against God, but in general speaking, it's subjective.
But learning is on the background of also cultural things and also the environment on how it occurs. If you only look in the brain, what happens when learning, and this is kind of the bias that cognitive psychologists probably have. That is probably, in my opinion, something I would not agree with, and there are like other approaches to this. So cognitive psychology for me kind of fails here, because again, time-bound things, environment, cultural shit. Learning, if you only think about the brain, what happens here, that's for me way too limited. Like, in my opinion, but okay, we're gonna.
I think we should speak about this sometime later, and then maybe indeed see if we can convince Danny to come here.
And he's gonna come to my aid. Maybe he's gonna disagree with me, but I think he'd be more inclined to kind of give it other perspective on the matter. But
yeah, I think it would be fun, but I don't know if he is willing to join. Like the people we should definitely invite to come here sometime are Danny Hatcher, like Chris Aldridge. Bob Dodo, possibly Scott Shepard, but
Yeah, I'm gonna add Danny to the list, but that was a great talk. It was insane. So
yeah, I'll upload the video either later today or tomorrow. So
I get your perspective behind
They were
it.
done.
It's just like
Okay.
I know. I get your perspective. It's just like I find it difficult to argue otherwise from my point of view. From how much more we know now,
I think we have both equally interesting points of views that I think both are not like completely, and I think this was like a very fruitful discussion because I think it's an interesting, and I think there's different.
Valid.
Yeah, I would say so. And because I'm like I actually have a lot of lack of knowledge when it comes to like learning science and stuff. But like I could say I'm a historian, though I'm studying history, so I'm not so sure if I can say I'm a historian because then I have like credentials and like this big thing, but like still studying.
It's like saying you're an intellectual, yeah.
But like as a historian, this also makes more sense to me as a person that thinks of like the environment being very important about many things. Also because I've kind of had very spiritual experiences and I've experienced stuff. Thinking of the brain and ourselves as something that is not connected to the environment is also something I'm kind of against. I'm not thinking of like that we're kind of this siloed off thing from the world and we're like a thing that exists. I think we exist within the environment. That's kind of how I come from.
Well, we can exist within the environment with our brain still having its own function and purpose.
Exactly.
We can utilize it more effectively with what we know now.
It functions within the environment, and so within the environment, it functions in a certain way. If you would take the environment away, there is no that specific. The context is for me very important. If you get what I mean, right?
That's also systems theory. That is basically what Niklas Luhmann went into a bit. From what I remember of reading the Radical Luhmann. But let's just go off now before we continue for hours.
Bye.
Yeah, goodbye.
Yeah, it was a good talk, by the way. Bye.
Yeah.